It was an ordinary day of his work, which was already coming to an end. The last concrete mixer had driven in, and nothing foreshadowed the impending danger. The workers were finishing the last delivery of concrete when he suddenly received a call, and it turned out to be his brother. He asked why he wasn't answering, to which Baek Yi-soo said that it was quite noisy here, so he didn't hear the bell. He asked his brother if something had happened to him, but he answered in the negative, saying that he decided to dial him just like that. He asked if he needed a reason to call his brother, adding that he would like to meet him. Yi-soo asked if it had to be today because he was a little busy right now, but his brother insisted. Before he had time to answer, the voice of one of the workers was heard, who was dissatisfied with the way the others poured concrete. The pouring was indeed poorly done, and the bodies of the killed people floated to the surface, each of them wearing North Korean military uniforms. His brother again asked if he was going to come to the meeting tonight, but Yi-soo was in no hurry to answer. Suddenly, a young guy fell out of the door behind, who also seemed to be a little injured. A man came out of the door. In his hand, he had a knife with which he wounded the worker, and hatred was burning in his eyes. It was Lee Yong-chul, a member of North Korea's 525th Task Force. Seeing him, Yi-soo ended the call. He turned to the guy who was lying on the ground. He was a newcomer, who said that he was fine, and the wound was not deep, but the commander did not think so. He was the commander of the Special Unit of the National Intelligence Agency of the Republic of Korea, Baek Yi-soo, with a total of 12 infiltrations into North Korea. He took off his jacket to stop the bleeding, and then he was going to subdue Yong-chul, and the other workers began to place bets on how quickly he could handle it. This irritated Yong-chul, and he rushed at the commander with a knife, waving it at his throat, but he dodged as if from a child's attack. And then he hit him with his elbow from below in the jaw, and Yong-chul felt it well, but did not lose consciousness. But as it turned out, this was not the end, so it was immediately followed by another blow from above with a fist to his head. This time, the Korean could not stay on his feet and fell to the ground, which meant that he had lost consciousness after all. For Yi-soo, such a fight was not even a warm-up. He took his jacket back, saying that it was over. He put on his jacket, saying to patch up the newcomer and tidy up here. He himself had to go to a meeting with his brother. While removing the motionless body of Choi, one of the workers wrinkled his nose, saying that this is why he never talks about the robot. The commander heard this, he thought for a while, and then said to just tell everyone that he had a menial job. He had already reached the meeting place and went inside, walking towards the main entrance. It turned out to be a luxurious establishment, but he did not expect anything else from his brother. Seeing him, the doorman hurried to inform that all the seats, unfortunately, had already been booked, but Yi-soo did not care. He said this, but it was clear that the doorman did not really believe it, assessing the man with his eyes. He said that basic etiquette must be observed in their establishment, and then asked him to leave. He was still speaking when an expensively dressed man came out of the door, raising his right hand in greeting, looking at Yi-soo, who was looking at his brother. His brother approached them, telling the doorman that this was his brother. The doorman's reaction was not late. He bowed, asking for forgiveness, saying that he did not know that this visitor would actually be his guest. Yi-soo said that everything was fine and they had better go, and his brother was able to see the jacket he came in. On the back of it was the inscription, "Safety first." He read it and said that it was a pretty good phrase. Meanwhile, the workers on his team got together after a hard day to finally relax and throw themselves their first party in 3 months. But they didn't have much of a celebration. One guy was indignant that the only food they got was frozen pork. But another said that the commander said to wait. He was probably going to grab something else tasty. The guy with the earrings replied that it would be better if he went with the commander, because he was now having dinner with something luxurious. They saw cars drive into their territory, and a man, whom they recognized as the boss, got out of one of them. The newcomer, who had previously only silently chewed the pork heated on the grill, immediately jumped up to greet the chef. They apologized that they had already started drinking without him, but he said that he had a project to complete, and then he asked where Commander Baek Yi-soo was. Hearing that he had left early, he said that it only made his job harder, putting his hand in his pocket. The newcomer curiously asked what kind of work it was, but in response he received a bullet in the forehead because the boss took out a pistol from his jacket pocket. Such a shot killed instantly, and other workers saw with horror how their recent friend fell dead to the ground. At that moment, other people got out of the cars, and the chief said that today they were disbanding their special squad. He told them not to miss a single one, and the workers were seized with fear, because today not one of them was ready to say goodbye to life. Meanwhile, the brothers were still having dinner. The eldest tried to talk to Park Yi-soo about his work, but he did not listen to him. Finally, the brother pulled out some kind of card, saying that he could make him the head of one of the restaurants. He placed it on the table and then asked why the soldier was wearing a construction worker's uniform, to which Yi Su muttered something about supporting the population. But his brother was not very happy with this answer. Pouring wine, he asked if soldiers help civilians in their time, and Su replied that they should. Then the brother returned to the prospect of working in his company, describing his duties, but Yi Su again did not really listen. Suddenly his phone rang and he looked at the number. It was a guy from work, and the commander was supposed to answer his call. He told his brother that he had to take a call, then excused himself and went to the restroom. He stood near the sink and talked to a guy with earrings, whose name was Xion. He had a strange voice. In fact, that's how it was. The guy was sitting with his elbows on the wall and talking about the food they were eating. Then Xion told about what had happened, about the betrayal of Chief Zhang, and about the dissolution of their small detachment. Other workers had died earlier, and now they were thrown into the same place where they had once thrown out the bodies of enemy soldiers. Baek Yi Su told him to hold on a little longer because he would go there right away, but then changed his mind, telling him to run away because they were looking for him. But suddenly he heard shots through the phone and asked Xion where they shot, but there was no answer, and he screamed his name in horror, but there was no answer. At this time, a group of men approached the entrance to the restaurant, wearing bulletproof vests and masks covering their entire faces. Seeing new unexpected visitors, the doorman hurried to notify them that all the seats were occupied, but before he could finish speaking, his throat was cut. Yi Su was delayed, and his brother was already tired of waiting, when suddenly someone came in and he raised his head, asking if he had finished talking to his subordinates. But it wasn't Yi Su. Standing in front of him were 3 armed men in bulletproof vests, so their visit could only mean one thing. It was a special squad, most likely sent to eliminate his brother, but for what reason he did not know. Yi Su jumped out of the restroom, intending to immediately go to work, but armed men blocked his exit. As if to confirm his thoughts, one of the squad called his name, saying into the radio somewhere that the target had been confirmed, and they were starting to eliminate him. They rushed at him. One swung a knife, but the commander moved to the side, simultaneously grabbing his hand with the weapon. He hit the bridge of the attacker's nose with his elbow. This was his favorite blow because, as you know, the force of an elbow strike is 5 times greater than a fist strike. He then snatched the knife from his opponent's hand and finished him off by cutting him in the eyes, the only thing visible under the mask. Before he had time to recover, another member of the squad was already running towards him, and he also pulled out a knife. But his attack was also unsuccessful. It was not for nothing that Yi Su was appointed commander of the NAR. This included military training. He let go of the enemy as close as possible, and then again at the last moment he moved to the side, this time making a throw. A moment, and the enemy was already lying on the ground. Yi Su put a knife to the sole of his foot and tightly squeezed his knee. Without hesitation, the knife went through the shoe, and the man screamed in pain, clutching his leg, and Yi Su turned to the others. He had taken off his construction worker's jacket and was now wearing a military uniform, as if a different person was standing in front of them. He said that their movements were too predictable, so there was no point in fighting, but the men attacked again. He fought off 3 people at once, but it didn't look like he was losing. Suddenly, the 3 in front were joined by another one in the back, who intended to attack unnoticed and finish him off. Chief Zhang stood with a cigarette in his mouth, silently looking at the place where the enemy soldiers were dumped, and now their people were there. A subordinate approached him, saying that they had finished everything, and a special squad had been sent for Baek Yi Su. The chief asked if they really only sent 1 detachment, saying that for someone like Yi Su, 1 would not be enough. He turned out to be right. Despite the fact that the enemy was superior in numbers, the commander won, receiving only a couple of scratches. Wiping the blood from his face, he looked anxiously at the door to the dining room of the restaurant where he and his brother were having dinner, and became worried. However, his brother turned out to be not so simple. In his room, he had the same picture as Yi Su, where he turned out to be the winner. He even managed to leave one alive, and now he was holding a knife near his throat, asking who they were and why they had come. But the man was in no hurry to speak, and he cut his throat out of impatience, saying, however, that he was still a little in a hurry. His attention was attracted by a walkie-talkie sticking out in the pocket of one of them. A characteristic noise was emanating from it, and he listened to the message. Someone said to kill Baek Yi Su as soon as they found him, and also to kill everyone who was with him. He was surprised to see that bandits were still using such old-fashioned things, and the message was repeated. His face changed. He was the CEO of TS Financial Company, Baek Do-kyung, the head of Daesung Group. He was about to leave the room, heading towards the door, but suddenly someone called out to him from around the corner. It was Yi Su. Du Kyung asked him if these people were his guests, because alas, he did not greet them with warmth. They were sitting in the car, and his brother was trying to repeat the name of the abbreviation, which, as it turned out, Yi-soo worked for. Seeing that his master was not coping, the driver suggested that the organization was called NER, and handed him a rubber band. Du Kyung took it, saying that it was indeed reconnaissance, but he would never have been able to think that one of the commanders would be his brother. It turns out that he was an intelligence agent who goes to North Korea and kills people, and Yi-soo replied that he was not just a bandit either. He was also Daesang's boss, essentially the leader of a criminal organization, so he was also quite dangerous and cunning. They were still driving, but Yi-soo asked to stop, but Do Kyung asked why he was doing this, because it was dangerous outside. However, Yi-soo wanted to go out precisely because of this. He explained that those people would not rest until they killed him. But Do Kyung said that it would be better if he dropped him off near the police station right away, and then they would definitely not find him. Do Kyung said that they had already arrived and got out of the car. Yi-soo noticed that he had never been here before. It turned out to be the site of a funeral. There was a procession on the stone steps, and below there were wreaths with a portrait of the deceased. They walked for a short time, and then Do Kyung turned around and asked his brother if he really thought he was joking. Yi-soo did not expect such an answer. He asked him what it all meant, and he began to have a bad feeling. Meanwhile, some people approached Do Kyung, first a man who said that everything was ready, and then a woman who was holding a photo frame. She handed it to Do Kyung, saying that within 2 hours everything would be ready to begin, and he, looking at the photo, turned to his brother. Suddenly, he showed it to Yi-soo, and he saw that there was his portrait on it, and then added that if everything is decided when he dies, then let him do it. They stood in the temple where they usually come to mourn and pray for the deceased near his photograph. Do Kyung said that it was just a performance. It's used when you need to clear your name or escape. He said he learned it from the Japanese Yakuza, but Yi-soo doubted it would work. Do Kyung agreed, saying that of course they would have doubts, but that was why there was one important detail that he had already taken care of. He said that Daesan is a more famous organization than Yi-soo thought, so guests will come to the ceremony to express condolences. After all, his brother died, which means such a visit was necessary, so such people would be able to witness his death. Will they doubt it? No, they won't, because if he, Do Kyung, said it, then it was so. Each of them had a special invitation, but then a car with tinted windows drove up, clearly not fitting into the general atmosphere. The security guards in charge of the ceremony thought it was either food or big shots. In fact, Boss Zhang was sitting in the car and was studying the portfolio of the deceased. He noticed that he turned out to be the brother of Boss Tai-sung. One of the guards tapped on the tinted windows, saying that you couldn't get in here without a special invitation. The chief turned to the people who were sitting in the back, saying that this was their last mission. They must make sure that Baek Yi-soo was dead at all costs. The men were dressed in sports sweatshirts that did not hide their piles of muscles, and they got out of the car one by one. The guard blocked their way, demanding to introduce themselves and show their invitation. But the man in the cap looked at him silently. Then the guard decided to act more radically and tried to brush off his cap, but received a rough blow to the head. The other guards stood silently and watched for a while, not understanding this behavior. Then they rushed at the unexpected guests, and they attacked them in response. But it immediately became clear that the forces were not equal. This was a special detachment that came with the chief in order to complete its mission, to disband the detachment with Commander Baek Yi-soo. The mission of the NAR Special Detachment, the second Halra detachment for operations in North Korea, they could not fail. They easily dealt with the security guard and now intended to climb the steps, where Brother Yi-soo stood at the top with his bodyguard. But the latter had a completely different position. He began to go downstairs, taking off his jacket along the way. Finally, he approached one of them and said that this was a family funeral. Only those who were specially invited could attend. Despite the fact that he was 2 meters tall, the man from the special squad hit him from below in the jaw, again without explaining anything about his intentions. But the giant did not budge. It was a member of the Daesan group, the head of the security service, Ha Jin-woong, better known as Hanam Dong, the wall man. He grabbed the man's face with his huge hand, and the grip was so strong that his eyes popped out of his head. Then a crunching sound was heard, and the man fell, while his comrades in the squad looked on in surprise, because the thug had just broken his jaw with one grip. They rushed at him, saying that he had simply taken him by surprise, but Jin-woong effortlessly dodged their blows. With one hand, he held one by the face, and with the other, he raised his huge fist to strike. However, another from the special squad struck first. He continued to throw blow after blow, but it had absolutely no effect, and soon Jin-woong got tired of these annoying claps. He tensed his free arm so hard that his veins stood out, and then unleashed a crushing blow on the man's head, sending him crashing to the ground. He then turned to the other, whom he was still holding in his left hand, but he decided to somehow take the thug into a chokehold. However, none of the techniques had any effect on him. This time he even got a little angry, and the man prepared for the worst. The wall man shook him with all his might, and that was enough. But then he threw him straight at his comrade. Boss Zhang, who was watching this in the car, grimaced with displeasure, asking why these idiots couldn't deal with one person. He had to take the situation into his own hands, so he got out of the car and walked towards Jin Woon, apologizing for his subordinates. He said that there had been a misunderstanding, and as he said this, he handed him a business card with his details, which stated that he was a colonel. Once again saying that this was a misunderstanding, he explained that he was the boss of the deceased Yi Su and came here to express his condolences. Jin Woon thought about his words for a moment and then looked up at the guy standing there, who nodded his head in approval. Seeing this, he said that he would take the boss into the room, and after a while he was already sitting in front of Yi Su's photo. He asked, as if Yi Su himself, if he was really dead. And if so, how much did his brother Bak Do-kyung know? The brothers sat at the exit. Do-kyung agreed that the situation with betrayal is really difficult. He asked what Yi Su was going to do with the boss, offering his services to kill him. But his brother thought a little differently. He said that his brother should not interfere further, but he did not understand the refusal, asking whether he should really do nothing. And Su replied that there was no need, he would meet with Chief Zhang himself, and then they came up with this plan with the brother he pretended to be. He decided that he had pretended to be grieving enough and called out to him, then pulled out a knife using his brother's face. The story was that there was another brother in the family who was a successful businessman and arrived after hearing about Yi Su's death. He pointed the knife at the boss, saying that it was found in his brother's body, so if the boss doesn't explain himself, then the same knife will be found in him. He held a knife to his throat, asking who killed his brother. Zhang realized that Yi Su most likely really died. He asked the gentleman to calm down, saying that Commander Baek Yi Su died in an accident. He thought that the bandit would leave him alone if he said this, and added that he could not reveal the details due to confidentiality, but he hid him. He said that the boss talked too much, although he clearly asked who was his brother's killer, and with that, he prepared a knife. Fearing for his life, the boss instinctively reached into his jacket pocket for a pistol, but at that moment, a girl and Jin Un intervened. The girl blocked Do-kyung with herself, preventing him from attacking the boss, and Jin Woong put his hand on his shoulder, saying that it would be better for him to leave. To make it more believable, Do-kyung shouted at him to get out of here, calling the boss a damn bastard and pretending that he wanted to get to him. The real Do-kyung couldn't believe that he would ask so furiously who killed his brother. Yi Su's acting simply amazed him, but it worked. He told his brother about this, asking if he had learned this in intelligence, how to work undercover and all that, to which Yi Su replied that it was not important. He said that this would stop them for a while, but they would come again soon, so he couldn't stay here forever. Then, in the funeral hall, he in fact did not pretend. His emotions were not a game. He said what he felt. He said that at that moment he really wanted to kill his boss, because he did the same to the workers from his special squad. His brother replied that he understood his feelings, but why shouldn't he stay here and not make too much noise, because the main thing was that he survived. He added that he would give him a job and put his hand on Yi Su's shoulder, but Yi Su asked if he was asking him to hide here and become a bandit like him. After thinking a little, he agreed, saying that he really was asking him about it, but only because then they would both survive. Hearing these words, Yi Su tapped his hand to remove it, and he went out without saying another word. When he left, Do-kyung sighed, saying that they were definitely not twins. He told Ji-woon to take people and keep an eye on him. It was already dark. The weather was cool outside because a little rain was dripping. Yi Su stood near the traffic light, about to cross the road. Suddenly he noticed that someone was following him very carelessly. It was Jin Woon, whose surveillance always ended with him being discovered. Likewise this time, Yi Su asked if he would really continue like this, to which he replied that this was an order from the director, that is, Yi Su's brother. At the same time, they were being watched by a man in a hoodie who had a knife in his hand. When he saw Jin Woong, he hid around the corner of the house. Chief Zhang ended the conversation by instructing him not to stop monitoring Do-kyung's house. He remembered his face that day. He thought that brother Yi Su definitely knew something, but his thoughts were interrupted by a hand on his shoulder. It was his daughter who jumped on his back instead of greeting him, but he didn't mind, because he hadn't seen her for a long time. He asked how she got there, to which the daughter replied that the seats were hard and she could not straighten her legs the whole way. She said that the flight was difficult because she wanted to see him quickly, and he replied that he would tell the pilot to fly faster. Her eyes sparkled, and she said that this was the power of intelligence, but he shrugged, saying that he was doing all sorts of paperwork. Do Kyung clutched the empty pack of cigarettes, saying that he would go out to buy more, but the girl, apparently she was his secretary, said that she would do it herself. But he told her not to be such a beach and to let him breathe some fresh air, but the girl was adamant. She said that since she wanted it so much, she should go out with a guard because it was dangerous alone. Then he looked at her with curiosity, and then something strange flashed in his eyes. A minute later, they were going down the elevator, accompanied by two thugs. He took her words a little differently, choosing the girl herself to go with him. Suddenly, he turned to the two guards, saying that this girl was his sister Su-ah, and added that the guys should greet her. He approached one of them, asking if she had not become even more beautiful, and he hastened to say that his sister was really beautiful. Do Kyung's look changed dramatically. He said that everyone who called Su-ah's sister ended up the same way, and then asked the man who he was. Instead of answering, he suddenly took out a knife and waved it near Do Kyung's face, but he managed to dodge, while simultaneously assessing the situation. But suddenly, Su-ah also took out a knife, so now both sides had weapons, and Do Kyung asked if she had another one for him. She said that he was hidden under her skirt, and he still reached there, asking for forgiveness, because the other thug also took out a blade. The first spy rushed at Do Kyung, but was unable to hit him because it was not easy to turn around in the elevator, which allowed him to dodge his attack. With a deft movement, he grabbed him by the arm and then pushed away and stabbed him back, depriving him of any attempts to attack. However, that was only what he thought as the impact cut through the man's suit, and he saw that he was wearing a bulletproof vest. Then, Do Kyung realized that his knife was too short to pierce the body armor, so he had to hit him in the face. He was about to finish with him, but he heard Su-ah fall in another corner of the elevator, while another thug was approaching her. He swung his knife, intending to strike a fatal blow and end her life, while she cowered in a corner. He hit, but it wasn't the girl he stabbed, because Do Kyung covered her with himself, so now he stood with a knife in his shoulder. But that didn't seem to bother him much as he grabbed the confused bandit and threw him into the elevator wall. But then another man attacked Su-ah, whom Do Kyung did not have time to finish off, so he now rushed at them again. Do Kyung managed to repel his attack, noticing how Su-ah rushed at another bandit, preventing him from getting up and taking the knife. But then Do Kyung lunged towards the enemy and knocked out his knife. It turned out that he was quite good with the weapon. He pressed the man against the wall of the elevator, and with some strange force he also put the man's knife to his own throat. His appearance suddenly changed. His suit was torn, and his body was very strong and covered with some strange tattoos. A cry of horror was heard from the elevator. It was Do Kyung who plunged both knives into the bandit's shoulders, and together with Su-ah, they were already leaving the floor. He approached another guard, asking if he had a cigarette, and he reached into his pocket, saying that he would look now. However, instead of a cigarette, he suddenly took out a knife and plunged it into Do Kyung's stomach, who did not understand what had just happened. Then with one hand, he grabbed the insolent man by the face, like the big Jin, and with the other he carefully grabbed the knife, saying that it hurt a little. The guard said that it was better for the gentleman not to take it out, because he deliberately chose a large knife, but Do Kyung squeezed his face. For a moment, the guard's face seemed to move a little. Do Kyung swung his knife, but the guard jumped back. In his hand, another curved knife suddenly appeared, more like a karambit, and his face turned out to be a simple mask. But it seems that there was still one real guard with them, who told the director that he would detain the bandit. However, Do Kyung told him to just give him what he asked for, but he asked for another knife and cigarettes, and told him to look after Su-ah. He had 2 knives in his hands. Now he was going to kill the traitor, but before that he decided to ask if he wanted to say something finally. A young man was looking at him. He was a special-purpose NAR assassin with the pseudonym Ghost. He said that Do Kyung talks a lot, and he talked about the murder of his brother, asking if it was his doing. The bandit replied that if given the chance, he would gladly kill him. Then he rushed at Do Kyung, but he was wounded. Ghost asked if Baek Yi-soo was really dead, to which Do Kyung replied that even his boss came to express his condolences. But for some reason, Ghost was not satisfied with this answer, and he rephrased the question, asking where Baek Yi-soo was. Yi-soo, meanwhile, walked with Jin-un, who said that he would be guarded by order of the leader. Suddenly, they disappeared into a gateway, and their pursuer was confused, but the task needed to be completed, so he followed them. Obviously, it turned out to be a trap, and when his face cautiously poked out from behind the house, Jin-woon hit it with all his force. The guy barely managed to somehow put his hands out, but still flew away. He thought that with such a bodyguard, it would not be easy. On top of that, he managed to land in such a way that he broke his arm, and then Yi Su came out of the shadows and asked if Zhang had sent him. The guy said that he was right, and then suddenly added that he couldn't just die, and for some reason his voice seemed familiar. He took off his hood, revealing his face, and one of his subordinates, Li Xian, was now looking at the commander. Jin Woon told Yi Su that it turns out he knows him, and Xian shouted that of course he knows him and showed his broken arm. The commander came up to him and put his hands on his shoulders. He said that he should have stayed with them then, and everything could have been different. But Xian said that he was the only one who survived, so the next time he goes to eat delicious food, he will go with him. Then he suddenly grimaced, and when Yi Su asked what was wrong with him, he replied that he just had an empty stomach, and his arm was broken, thanks to his thug. While saying the last thing, he was interrupted because Jin Woon's face suddenly darkened greatly, and now he looked creepy. They continued to fight, and he dodged the killer's attacks as best he could with his wounds. They fought, but he understood that he would not last long, so he had to gather his last strength and attack without stopping. He attacked him, launching attack after attack, but he successfully repelled everything. It seemed that he was full of strength. His vision began to blur. The image of the phantom was already floating before his eyes, and besides, the wound turned out to be quite deep. He carried out the last attack, this time almost hitting him. But still, the enemy turned out to be strong and dodged. He said that he recognized his strength, because he was pretty good. But with these words, he took out a fishing line from somewhere and knocked out one of his knives. The situation was critical. He asked again where Bak Yi Su was, but Do Kyung could barely stand on his feet. He understood that everything would end here for him. He decided that he should try the last thing he had left and asked what he had already heard about how tactless he could be. With these words, he cut his hair and then surprised him even more by saying that he was Baek Yi Su, and the ghost was a fool. He really looked like Baek Yi Su in this form, and the killer even thought about his words, thinking about the credibility. He said that it was impossible, but Yi Su rushed at him, saying how stupid he was, although it was difficult for him to move. But seeing how he fought, Ghost said that Baek Yi Su, the commander of the NAR Special Squad, cannot move so clumsily. But as it turned out, Do Kyung had planned everything from the very beginning. He struck with his free hand, pulling on the karambit line. With his last efforts, he pulled on it, knocking out one of the knives, and ran his other hand along the bridge of the man's nose. He fell to the floor, covering his bloody face with his hands, and Yi Su asked if he still doubted whether he was real or not. He told him to get up and fight, and he rushed at him, but for some reason the advantage was no longer on his side. He missed the moment again when Yi Su grabbed his hand, then squeezed it and prepared to stab him from the other side. He stood in the same stance as his brother, who had undergone special training. This made Ghost think that this was the real Yi Su. He attacked again, saying that it was impossible, but now it was more of a self-conviction, because Yi Su was here. He even fought differently, not like before. Now he had strength, and he moved completely differently, which greatly frightened the enemy. And then something incredible happened. The ghost wanted to spin his karambit for another attack, but Yi Su suddenly stopped him. He pressed his own knife into his shoulder, and he swung it to finally finish off the bandit, and he panicked, not knowing how to dodge. At the last second, he pushed himself away and fell on his back, avoiding a fatal blow. But now it definitely seemed to him that it was Baek Yi Su. It was the real Baek Yi Su who was standing over him again. Now there could be no doubt, because only he knew this technique. The ghost told him not to approach, and in a panic began to look for his knife, anticipating his imminent death. Do Kyung swung his hand and tensed his right hand. He quietly told his brother that he should have stayed with him and seen all this. The ghost finally managed to find his knife, and now he put it in front as his only defense, and Yi Su rushed at him. He knocked him down, but didn't even stab him with a knife, hitting him near the head, and the phantom lay with his eyes wide open because he fell on his knife. Suddenly, the weapon fell from his hand, and his body went limp and became heavy. He fell breathlessly on the bandit. He got up and saw a car approaching the house, which meant he had to get out, because he could still survive. Su-ah sat in the other room, saying that this was too much, because soon everyone would notice Do Kyung's absence. She said that they should appoint a new director, but Jin Woong replied that Daesang without Do Kyung would cease to be Daesang. But she didn't like this answer. She said that Director Baek would never allow something like this to happen, and she couldn't just remain inactive. But Jin Woong interrupted her. She saw how tears rolled down from the big man, and he said that there was simply no such thing as Do Kyung. Yi Su walked with his head down, and Xian hurried after him, telling him to wait for him, but the commander was thinking about his brother. Xian blocked his path, asking where he was going to go, but he only answered something about the wounds on his brother's body. The killer was hired by Chief Zhang because there were many cases when he hired special people for murky matters. Shi On said that he understood this, but Chief Zhang and his men were not those who could be easily reached. For a moment, he became afraid to look at the commander. His face was full of despair, and he said that he would find and kill them all. In the morning in the Pangyo Techno Valley, a group of people stood on the helipad. It was a small detachment with a commander. It was the CEO of T1 ICT, Kim Taiwan, who was sitting and peeling an apple, wishing that there was nothing edible in Pangyo. He said that there is no big money to be made here, so men should play in the wide waters of Seoul. They were at a general meeting. The man approached the fence on the roof, over which ropes were thrown. It turned out that they were holding a man who was approached by Kim Taiwan, asking what Chief Zhang was talking about today. The man said he didn't know what he was talking about, but Taiwan began chewing on the apple, saying that if it was rotten, it should be thrown away. He cut one of the ropes and the man immediately spoke, saying he remembered being told that Daesung had encountered a problem. He said that their boss Baek Do-kyung was nowhere to be seen, so they were inactive, and this got Taiwan very interested. But then he cut another rope, asking if this information was accurate, and the man assured that everything was confirmed. He said that was all he heard, so he asked to get him out of here, but Taiwan only cut the last rope. The general director turned to his subordinates and told them to gather everyone, because today they were having Daesung group for dinner. Fortunately, the man who had already said goodbye to life did not die, because to his surprise, it turned out to be the bottom floor. Yi Su walked along the Mahjongdong livestock market, remembering how he was told that it was dark under the entrance, and it was so. He arrived at the inconspicuous butcher shop, thinking about Chef Zhang's method. If you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight. These guys in security suits were also trained by Chief Zhang, which means everything should ultimately lead to him. He carefully opened the door of the establishment, because if he let his guard down, he would be finished. These people would not tolerate mistakes. He abruptly entered the door, holding a knife at the ready. But to his surprise, he saw only ordinary butcher shop workers. One of them saw him, asking if he was Baek Yi Su, saying that if anyone else had come in, he would already be dead. Yi Su approached him and asked what happened here, to which the man replied that it was all Chief Zhang. He said he heard on the radio that Zhang's men had taken care of everything, so the picture was no better elsewhere. At the same time, Shi On was just checking another place where, as the man said, Zhang's people had managed to visit. The man put his hand on his shoulder, telling Yi Su that Chief Zhang was too strong for him and he couldn't handle it alone. He said that he had to run away, and his last words were that Yi Su died right in his arms long after that. But some of his story puzzled Yi Su, because he had never heard of the boss being associated with any organization. Meanwhile, Taiwan reached the Daesung Group's main building and launched an attack because it was a great opportunity. However, he could not believe that Daesung was so weak, and yet he was also considered one of the 4 main groups. Suddenly, he saw how the situation began to change, and the reason for this was the appearance of Ha Jin-woon's unshakable wall. He said that he was already the 4th bastard this week who dared to attack Daesung. But Taiwan didn't like his words, and he said that in this case he would play like a real bastard, taking out a knife. But this didn't seem to bother Jin Woong. He just sighed heavily and spread his arms, telling them to attack. However, the general attack was interrupted by the appearance of a young man who walked straight to Jin Woong, and he recognized him as Baek Yi Su. He said that he needs this organization to avenge his brother, and therefore he asks him to give him Daesung. His eyes were full of determination, hatred, and something else. But one thing was clear. He was really going to take revenge. Then Taiwan hurried towards them, but Yi Su simply hit him. Then Taiwan was annoyed to recognize the guy as Baek Do-kyung, which meant that the director was simply hiding somewhere. That's why he didn't come. He had a knife in his hand, and seeing that these people wanted to destroy Daesung, which he needed, he began to wave it. His blow caused Taiwan's nose to bleed, and he thought what that crazy Do-kyung was doing and told his men to attack. He said that today Daesung would come to an end. But this only made Yi Su angrier. He fought well. Seeing that he was defeating one after another, Taiwan shouted for a knife and rushed at Do-kyung. But Yi Su reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye, he turned around and knocked the knife out of his hand with one swing, and Taiwan became worried. Yi Su approached him, and he was already scared to death, so he ordered everyone to leave, saying that he was returning to Pangyo. Jin Woong, who was watching all this, remembered his words that without Do-kyung, Daesung would cease to be Daesung. But what if Do-kyung could be found? He turned to Yi Su, saying that if he wants to get Daesung, then he, Jin Woong, will help him because he trusts him. A month had already passed. The members of the General Meeting of Organizations were sitting together again, But this time, Do Kyung was absent from their company. Among them were 3 men and 1 woman who said that she had heard that Baek Do Kyung had died, which meant the end for Daesung. Suddenly, they heard footsteps. It was Yi-soo walking. Then Jin Woon said that in order to get Daesung, he must become Baek Do Kyung. Together with Jin Woon and Shi-on, he entered the meeting room of the general meeting, which served as a hotel restaurant. He had already gotten the same tattoos on his chest and arms as his brother, and also learned his way of communicating. Before this, Soo-ah taught him some things, for example, that it is better to keep your fingers behind the blade because this will give the blade strength. She said that someone might notice them if he didn't watch his movements. It was a meeting of the leaders of the largest criminal group in Seoul, a general meeting, the purpose of which was obvious. Supposedly, it was to prevent conflicts between gangs, but in fact, they were biding their time. A chance to capitalize when the clash occurred, and that was why Daesung had to be present. So-ah said she didn't understand why he had to pretend to protect Daesung, and he said he just needed a strong organization. An organization that is larger and stronger than others. He needed it to take revenge for his brother. Meanwhile, Chief Zhang was standing next to a very important person, listening to his praise. Seoul Police Chief Cho Won-ho himself praised him, saying that he did a good job and his skills were worthy of praise. Zhang brushed it off, saying that it was all thanks to his support, but the boss said that he was a good leader. However, he then pointed his finger at the mountain of concrete mixture, asking why his subordinates were now buried here. Zhang said it was a sacrifice for the greater good, but the police chief laughed, saying it was like a proverb. But Zhang went on to say that officials are now worried, and the North Korea Special Forces are a relic of the past. He explained that he was under constant pressure so he couldn't keep track, but Won-ho interrupted him by placing his hands on his shoulders. He asked if it was really difficult to eliminate a couple of people, because he had no idea how much money he had to spend. He asked why he eliminated Do Kyung, because Taesong was a member of the General Assembly, and therefore should have understood the consequences of this. But suddenly, Zhang stopped playing the role of a subordinate who was being reprimanded. He told Jo Won-ho not to show off. He showed a police badge with the symbol of Korea, saying that Jo Won-ho's role in this project is to keep his nose to the ground. He threw the badge into a hole of cement, saying that they needed a public figure, so if he didn't like his role, he should get out. As he said this, one of Won-ho's guards approached him and grabbed the boss by the collar, asking if their boss was his friend. Won-ho laughed awkwardly, noticing that he had dexterous hands. He saw how he knocked down one of the guards. With some incomprehensible blow, he knocked him out and then took out a pistol from his jacket pocket and aimed at Jo Won-ho. A general meeting, and so what? Why should it bother him? Because he buried his own subordinates. Won-ho waved his hands, saying that he understood everything and would definitely figure it out, because he knew the people from the general meeting. This was what Zhang wanted to hear. He suggested not to let each other down anymore, saying that he would like to meet Baek Do Kyung. Present at the meeting were Jeorang Reserve CEO Ryu Tae-hyun, boss of the Jeorang organization in Yongsan, HHS Entertainment CEO Han Hae-sung, head of the entertainment campaign in the Gangnam area, the owner of the trading company Cheon Uncha Yu-hwa, the head of the Korean Chinese organization in Guro, and also Yilhak Capital CEO Lee Sung-min, head of a small organization in Gudo, 9 Knives, in Jongyo. Just in the middle of their conversation, Shi-on intervened, looking into the hall and telling the director that the meeting was being held here. They entered, and Do Kyung took the only empty seat. All the members of the meeting were surprised by his visit. Hae-sung said that they heard that his brother died, so it must have been hard for him because that's not usually his style. Others also chimed in, saying that there were rumors about a crazy funeral, so everyone was asking him to tell him. Hae-sung put the cup on the table, saying that in this case, they must decide whether Baek Do Kyung deserves to sit in this place. Do Kyung said that if he knew, he could come and support, but since he didn't do this, then at least let him not talk about his brother. He suddenly took out a knife and stabbed it into the table, asking who they were to talk about the qualifications of Daesung Group. Hae-sung grimaced, looking at him with contempt and fear at the same time. He asked how they should understand these words. But Do Kyung looked at him with a creepy look, saying that he would answer in simple words. From now on, Daesung Group will not attend the general meeting. They were returning by car, and Jin Woong said that now the General Assembly had become their enemy. He asked Yi-soo if he had a plan. However, in fact, he did not have any plan. In that establishment, he simply said what he thought. Suddenly, Jin Woon noticed a car jump out from around the corner, picking up speed and rushing straight towards them. Fortunately, a collision was avoided, but other cars appeared from somewhere and blocked their way. A guy wearing a red jacket and holding a brass knuckle in his hand came out of one of the cars. It was Ryu Tae-hyun, who rushed at their car. He broke the glass with brass knuckles and leaned over, saying that if he can do whatever he wants, then let Do-kyung give him Taesung. It all started when Yi-soo expressed his plan. The first thing in it was to catch the rat. He remembered Ryu Tae-hyun talking about the details of the funeral. But it was strange, of course, his brother informed them, but obviously without such details. He said that since the meeting was not related to a funeral, this meant one thing. There was a rat among the members who was leaking information. He said that therefore he would not participate in the meeting as long as the rat was there, but he would not have to look for it either. Then his plan was to smoke the rat out of the hole, and now in front of him was the face of Ryu Tae-hyun, who was that very rat. Immediately after the meeting, he took a couple of cars with him as an escort and drove out to pick up Do-kyung, and now he demanded that he get out of the car. Yong-san's boss, who has the most problems with Daesung and also does not hide his hostility, was the rat. Then the head of Shi-on appeared from the car, who said that the glass could not have been broken, calling him a baby. Tae-hyun looked at him, asking what he just called him, and when he repeated, he said that he liked his impudence, but he would beat him up. He hit Shi-on, but he only put out his hand, blocking the blow without much effort, because he once worked with the commander. He asked if Tae-hyun was really a gangster, because with such a blow, and even with brass knuckles, he should have at least touched him. Tae-hyun looked at the guy. It was clear that he was interested in him, but their fight was interrupted by the sound of white cars parking. It was Lee Sung-min, the head of the Nine Knives, who said that they should stop there. Tae-hyun mimicked him, saying that since Master Sung-min said to stop, then he should definitely listen. He approached him, saying that they were going to have a party after the meeting, and asked if Sung-min wanted to join. Suddenly, a man put his hand on his shoulder, saying that Tae-hyun had grown up, and he looked at him displeased. Shu Eon asked Jin Woong who the old man was, but he replied that it was Ilhak's elite. They were the best in Seoul in the past. This was also evident from the faces of Tae-hyun's bandits, who were surprised that old man Choi Jong-ho from the Nine Knives was here. He was the chief executive of Ilhak Capital, Choi Jong-ho, a member of the second generation of Gudo. Tae-hyun looked at them with resentment and a little anger, cursing Ilhak and saying that Daesang was his prey. Jin Woon suddenly got out of the car. He decided to greet old acquaintances, telling Sunbae that they had not seen each other for a long time. Jung-ho was surprised, asking when he got so big, and Jin Woo said that he should have visited them earlier. Lee Seung-min, meanwhile, approached Tae-hyun, saying that they would like to invite Daesung as their guests, and asked if he would mind. He approached the door where Yi-soo was sitting, offering to go in his car, because the glass of this one was damaged. Still, Yi-soo got out of the car, saying that it was quite scary, but somewhat expected, and Seung-min opened the doors for him. Seung-min told the two to go ahead, and he was going to talk to his friend, but Jin Woon said that he had to accompany the director. However, Yi-soo told them not to worry, saying that the car would still be too small for everyone. They drove out, and Seung-min asked about Daesang. He asked if they were really going to leave the general meeting, to which Yi-soo also responded by asking if they were not kicked out. But Seung-min said that if they leave the organization, problems will certainly begin with the others. He continued by saying that there is nothing but testing and competition in the congregation, so he needs strength to survive. Yi-soo didn't quite understand what this guy was trying to achieve, so he asked the director what his intentions were. After thinking for a moment, Seung-min looked away. He told Mr. Baek that he needed strength. That's why he was here. Meanwhile, Jung-ho asked Jin Woong when he was going to join them, but Jin Woong said that he was working for Daesang. Jung-ho replied that Jin Woong's past was connected with Gudo, and they still had a place for him, but the big man was adamant. He was committed to Daesung. He once again said that his organization is Daesang Group. Moreover, there are things that he must do. But Jung-ho said that he had nothing to do in Daesan because today he would fall, and this had already been decided. Upon hearing this, Jin Woon turned pale. He was brought to an unfamiliar place, where he saw a group of men in white suits who turned out to be from the Nine Knives. They said they would take care of him, and Yi-soo asked Seung-min what that meant, but he replied that it was the best they could do. Suddenly it dawned on him. He had just realized how much he had made a mistake, and he glared at Seung-min, saying that he was the rat. He turned to Shion, telling him to detain Lee Seung-min, and he agreed, telling the commander to be careful too. And then he hit the driver Seung-min, who was going to step on the gas as soon as Do-kyung was in the hands of the knives. Yi-soo got out of the car, and a man in a white suit and glasses was already looking at him, who said that everything would end quickly. Tae-hyun sat in the car and thought with annoyance that he had to let Do-kyung go in favor of Seung-min and his Nine Knives. He said that his people were fools if they did not understand such obvious things as the power of Ilhak. He said that he had seen them with his own eyes. Just 3 of them were capable of destroying the entire Gangbuk region, which very well described their power. He continued, saying that there were once 9 of them, now only 6 remained, but 3 would be enough to destroy the area. Then he thought what kind of idiot would stand up to them. But right at that moment, Bak Yi-soo, that is, Do Kyung, hit one of the men. Tae-hyun thought that if there was someone who was capable of destroying Gudo, he would certainly become the strongest in Seoul. Last night, they were sitting by the lake, Police Chief Won-ho was fishing, and he was thinking about the upcoming crime against Dae-sung. Won-ho asked if he felt like Dae-sung wasn't the same anymore. He was just a bunch of little trash. He said that because of the project of his superiors, Bak Do-kyung lost his younger brother, and now Dae-san was in complete chaos. Seung-min agreed, but said that starting a war now would be very difficult, to which Won-ho replied that he was just being evasive. Throwing the debris off the cigarette, the boss said that this couldn't be done, because then he would lose everything, so Ilhak shouldn't be careful. And besides, if he had mentioned the 9 knives at a general meeting, no one would have dared to squeak in his direction. The boss was talking about how he, Lee Seung-min, would become the real chairman, and to do this he needed to reorganize Ilhak. Then Seung-min stood up and looked at the lake. He said that he would do everything, but he wanted something in return. He said that in return, he would also like to take part in the project that the boss had mentioned earlier, and he was surprised at his insatiability. He said the project was called One Sink, but he had no idea how Seung-min was going to get a position there. Yi-soo hit the man with glasses again, and he lost his footing a little, almost falling to the ground, while others stood in surprise. Then he finally knocked the man down. It was clear that he fought well, and then asked if they really thought that they could take possession of Dae-san. It doesn't matter whether it was an order or their personal decision. By doing so, they were challenging him as a leader. He looked at the men in suits with his furious gaze and said that today, Ilhak will be destroyed. Seung-min decided not to wait any longer. Intending to get out of the car, however, as soon as he reached for the door, a knife flew towards him. The knife was thrown by Shion, who said that he was actually ordered to grab him, so he couldn't be allowed to get out of the car. The man Yi-soo hit was named Hyungnim, and now he was standing on the ground again, saying that he would have laid back a long time ago if he were older. He turned to the other Gudo members, who laughed a little, because it had been a long time since they had seen Hyungnim hit someone. One of them rushed at Yi-soo, but he put out his hand, squeezing it at the elbow, thus blocking the blow, but the enemy was outnumbered. Another man struck immediately after him, but Yi-soo was able to dodge his blow. Only this man turned out to be much smarter. It was Choi Guan-pal, the 7th knife in the Gudo organization, who grabbed Yi-soo by the collar and now pulled him towards himself and hit him. And when he was on the ground, another man, Gudo's 9th knife, Lee Ji-Yu-chan, ran up to him and kicked him in the head. Jang Tak-bae, the 8th knife of Gudo, was already waiting for him when Yi-soo rolled away and swung to finish him off with a powerful blow to the jaw. At the last moment, he dodged, jumping away from the place where the man hit, but Hyungnim was already rushing towards him from behind. Yi-soo noticed that they deftly attacked from different sides, which meant that it was necessary to look for their blind spots and strike when they were not together. The 9 knives of Ilhak. Everyone talks only about their former glory, but there is something that everyone has forgotten about. At the same time, Jin Woon was fighting with his once good friend, who now wanted to lure him to the side of the 9 knives. However, something was still unclear, and this nuance was explained by Shion, who realized that he had to intervene. After all, even though Ilhak had the 9 knives, if he doesn't intervene now, then all these guys could end up badly. Of course, the men of the 9 knives were incredibly strong, but the problem was that the NAR commander, Baek Yi-soo, was fighting them. Shion jumped out of the car and kicked one of the knives in the head, and the men did not expect another one from Dae-sang to come. And Soo fought with full strength. He did not spare the enemy, because another reason was hidden in his victory, because in this way, he could take revenge. The men looked at him in surprise. They wondered how Dasan's boss could stand up to the strongest organization single-handedly. Guangpal swung his leg for a crushing blow, but for some reason Hyungnim shouted for him to stop. Baek Yi-soo remembered the words of his wrestling coach, who once told him that there are no special tricks in wrestling. He said that there are people who are full of strength and have goodwill, so they never fall, so they can only be immobilized. It is necessary to bridge their arms and legs so that they cannot move, because no matter how much willpower a person has, in the end, his body will not stand it. Guangpal fell, clutching the leg that he had just swung at Yi-soo. It turned out that he managed to grab it and then twist it. Neither Hyungnim nor Seung-min could believe what Do-kyung was doing with the 9 knives. and Seung-min remembered how Won-ho's boss talked about his brother. He mentioned that he was a fairly capable guy, the commander of a special detachment of the NAR, so his brother was probably not a failure either. Hyung-nim thought, wasn't this already too much for a normal beating, where the one who beats and the one who defends switched places? Luckily, just when Yi-soo was about to hit Hyung-nim, Seung-min intervened, and he got out of the car and walked towards Yi-soo. He told them to stop and then put his hand on Yi-soo's shoulder before saying that he needed to talk to him. From the very beginning, this seemed strange to him, because despite the fact that Bak Yi-soo was disposed of, his twin brother was still alive. He told him that such aggressive behavior at the general meeting, plus the appearance he made here, showed that he was not Baek Do-kyung. But Yi-soo's reaction was different from what Seung-min thought. He grabbed his hand, asking what if he knew his real name. He said that it would not be difficult for him to kill him too, but Seung-min only narrowed his eyes, saying that he would like to negotiate. Shi-on, who had also stopped fighting with the knives, folded his hands in the shape of the letter T, as if indicating a timeout. The negotiations were held near the garages and were attended by Baek Yi-soo, Shi-on, and Jin Woong from Daesan, as well as Lee Seung-min and Nine Knives from Ilhak. Sitting on the chair opposite Yi-soo, Director Lee said that he admits that they didn't take them seriously at first, but they had already paid for it with a fight. Yi-soo told him not to delay and asked what kind of deal he was going to offer, because that was why he stopped the fight. Seung-min extended his hand and was handed some kind of file. He said that not long ago they received a request to get rid of him in Daesung. He said that they could find out who did it and for what purpose in this file because, speaking globally, it was a whole project. He announced the deal, saying that they would provide them with information about the organization that decided to attack Daesung, but in return, they would work for Ilhak. Ilhak needed a strong organization, so these were favorable terms for Daesung, but Yi-soo suddenly stood up to leave. There was no point in sitting here anymore, so he said that if this file was the main condition, then the negotiations were over. And besides, if everything was exactly like that, then it wouldn't be better for them to pick up this data file here and now themselves. He headed towards the exit, but his path was blocked by Jin Woong, who reminded him that this was a good opportunity to gain Ilhak's trust. However, Yi-soo said how he was annoyed by this, because the Ilhak guys are just a bunch of bandits who cannot be regarded as a threat at all. He added that there can be no talk of any trust in this case, because it was because of this that his comrades and brother were brazenly killed. But Seung-min decided not to retreat ahead of time. He also stood up, approached Yi-soo, and again addressed him by name. He told him to be careful in his words and actions because there was no such specimen anymore, and with these words he brought it to the flaming tank. Yi-soo took out a knife, saying that he wouldn't dare, but something still alerted him. This guy Lee Seung-min was not a simple bandit. Jin Woong wanted to stop him, but Yi-soo suddenly shouted that he didn't trust those bandit rats from Ilhak. He said that from now on they don't tell him what to do, because from now on Ilhak will be under Daesung's leadership. He put the knife to Seung-min's throat, saying that he would also take their CEO hostage, and Seung-min nervously looked at the blade. Nine Knives looked at all this in surprise, amazed at both the courage and impudence of this guy from Daesan. Hyung-nim and the other Knives were about to go to help the director, but Jong-ho shouted at them not to move. He realized that Do-kyung was not satisfied with the proposal, so he himself approached them and carefully pulled away his hand with the knife, offering an alternative. He said that he, Choi Jong-ho, the executive director of Nine Knives, would himself go with them as a hostage instead of Seung-min. With that, he handed the file to Yi-soo, but Yi-soo did not share his enthusiasm, asking if he really thought he was worth anything. But in Jin Woong's opinion, this would be enough, because if Baek Do-kyung were in his place, he would not do such stupid things. Hearing about his brother, Yi-soo cooled down a little. He said that then Shi-on is in charge of transporting and monitoring Choi Jong-hong. 5 years ago, he was interrogated when he returned from infiltrating North Korea and was under investigation for espionage. The colonel, Kim Jae-wook, asked what his mission was, to which he replied that it was confidential information. The colonel said that he had crossed a military line and in a North Korean uniform, but he replied that the nature of the mission covered everything. Then the colonel slammed his palm on the table, saying that they didn't really like their North Korean task force. Otherwise, he would personally influence his dismissal, because Yi-soo was wrong if he thought that they would do whatever he asked. The last argument was that he probably did a lot of dirty work, which means he was also stressed by this whole situation. However, then his interrogation was interrupted by the then young Chief Zhang, who then worked as the head of the Intelligence Special Operations Department. Management. Seeing him, Jae-wook said that it was his job to catch spies, and with that, he handed over the case of Bak Yi-su to him. Zhang said that Yi-su was not a spy because it was his friend, but Jae-wook looked at him suspiciously. Then Zhang took out a cigarette and approached him, taking off his glasses, and then said that probably the colonel had not heard. His face suddenly changed, and there was a feeling that he was a colonel himself. He looked at him with such a look that he even became nervous. He said that he didn't care whether he thought he was a communist or not, but this kid was not a communist, and his word is enough here. Without waiting for the colonel to answer, he removed the handcuffs from Yi-su, saying that they could go, and Jae-wook only managed to shout that this was disobeying an order. He asked if there was anyone outside to catch these two impudent people, but soon he himself went out and saw that all the guards had been killed. Zhang asked if he had really been intercepted on his return, but Yi-su said that fortunately, they did not believe him, and no one knew about the secret operation. It was then that he said these fateful words. The boss said that in any case, he trusts him because he is like family to him. He recalled this as he sat in Taison's office and looked at a photograph of him as the commander of the squad that shot Zhang. At that moment, Jin Woong entered the room and said that Shi-on is now looking after Choi Jong-ho as he requested. He was holding his head. It was clear that something was bothering him, but Jin Woon suddenly said to let him say something. He suddenly grabbed him by the collar and told him that he had made a mistake in his choice, saying that he could not trust him with Daesang. After all, he will never be able to become the same leader as his brother Bak Do-kyung, who would not allow such disgrace. At this time, Chief Zhang was sitting in one of the eateries. He called his daughter, asking if she was studying and eating well. She said that Dad was too grumpy, when suddenly a man he knew approached him. It was Police Chief Won-ho. He said that he knew a couple of good places that he should write about, and asked why here. But Zhang raised his finger to his lips, telling him to be quiet, and he told his daughter on the phone that he would call back later. Won-ho thought that his daughter should have already returned from studying abroad, so he must have talked to her. He asked if Zhang had sorted out the general meeting, but he was in no hurry to answer. He had not eaten much, so the news was not good. But Chief Zhang said that in any case, these were just a bunch of amateurs, and they were professionals. They both started eating, saying that very soon the OneSync project would be launched, and then no organization would be able to stop them. Zhang added that this time he should meet with the general meeting in person, and Won-ho was surprised by his words. He said that he felt that if he wanted to launch the OneSync project, he first needed to take control of the General Assembly. Besides, if the officials find out about this, then everything will go right wrong. After all, Bak Yi-su and his comrades have already been dealt with. However, Zhang said that everything was not so simple, because if you directly put pressure on the organization of the meeting, chaos would ensue. Choi Young. Ho spoke on the phone with Lee Seung-min, saying that it wasn't that big of a deal, and he felt like he was on vacation. But Seung-min apologized anyway, saying that he was sorry anyway, because Jung-ho was now a hostage. However, the big man from Ilhak just smiled and asked if this decision was not made for the good of the organization. He said that was why everyone decided to trust and follow his decisions, even though the result was a little clumsy. They said goodbye, agreeing to meet someday, and Seung-min said that now he should take a good rest. Jong-ho also hung up, and Shi-on, who was sitting next to him, noticed that it was as if he was not talking to his boss, but to his grandson. He continued by saying that even though he was captured because of such a boss, he continues to trust him completely. Jong-ho just shrugged, saying that he simply respects his boss, and regarding his hostage, it was his decision. But Shi-on asked if it wasn't the boss who told him to do this, because after all, an order was an order, and now he was taking the rap for it. For some reason, Jong-ho asked if Taeson was really such an organization, because if everything was really like that, then he was disappointed. Jin Woong repeated that Yi-su should leave, but Yi-su got angry, asking if he really thought he could give it away first and then take it back. He had already said that he was using Daesung for revenge, and besides, at the moment, Ilhak was in their hands. But he said that the problem was not at all in his methods. First of all, he had to pretend to be Baek Do-kyung, because so far this had not been seen. He said that if Baek Do-kyung were here, he wouldn't do this because Daesan is an organization that trusted him. And if Yi-su wanted to be like his brother, then he must also show this faith to the organization. Then he can replace Do-kyung. This faith, these methods are why Taeson still participated in these children's games as a general assembly, so Yi-su answered him. He said that the organization should simply obey the boss's orders, and as for his methods, he would simply use force. Hearing this, Jin Woon silently took off his jacket and then said that since Yi-su sees this as child's play, then let him handle it alone. Yi-su didn't think long. He jumped up and rushed at the big man, and then jumped, exposing his knee to strike. but Jin Woon was able to catch him. He grabbed Yisu by the shirt and threw him to the ground, so that he did not even have time to grab onto something and was knocked down. The big man asked if this was all that intelligence was capable of, however. Before he could finish speaking, a foot landed on his chin. It was Yisu. The blow was quite noticeable, and a characteristic burgundy mark was left on Jin Woon's face. But he realized that Yisu was not going to retreat. Jung Ho asked if this is an organization that obeys only by force, who will follow it. They trust each other only with their fists and pride, and they wage wars only because they rallied together with other people. If you meet a person who will do nothing but fight, and a person who will stab you in the back, then you can find the other one among them. The one you want to believe in and who you want to follow, because it seems to you that this path is the most correct. And Su still overpowered Jin Un, swinging to hit, but he did not get up, and was now lying on the floor of the room, where everything was turned over. He let go of the big man and turned to leave, finally saying that he was wrong, and the problem was not in his methods of solving cases. He said that their system did not necessarily have to be based on force, because if the organization decided everything by force, then it would already be an army. Xi'an's phone rang. Seeing who was calling, he stood up and prepared to leave, telling Jung Haeon that he was interesting, and they would chat some more. He suddenly wondered if there was someone who could not trust anyone. Such a person would not try to forcefully put pressure on other people. Seeing Xi'an, whom he called Yisu, said that from today, they will create their own organization. They will do this with the help of strong people who do their job honestly. He gave Xi'an a list of those who needed to be contacted. He said that the deadline for this was 1 week, after which they would get rid of the General Assembly, and themselves would become the strongest organization in Seoul. Jin Woong was lying on the floor. He was a little annoyed that he lost to Bak Yi-soo, even though he was the commander of the NAR Special Squad. He remembered how 4 years ago he worked in a butcher shop, and that's when he first met Bak Do-kyung. One day he came to him again, but Jin Woon was not happy with this man, because it was clear from him that he was involved in dirty deeds. Then Do-kyung said that if Jin Woong continues to be so unkind, he may soon lose his business. However, Jin Woong only told him that they do not allow smoking in the establishment, and then Do-kyung apologized, changing the subject. But he pointed to a couple of beaten men who were scattered around the diner, asking if they weren't his customers. But Jin Woon told him to stop it and get out before he made any noise, and then added that it was getting late. But suddenly a man in a red suit appeared from behind the door and was very surprised to see Jin Woon. He said that he had heard a lot of rumors, but it really was Jin Woong, and then asked if he really worked here now. It was Lee Hong-gu, director of the Hook Il-soo organization, which was part of the Gorang group and dealt with loans and credits. He turned to Do-kyung, saying that the boss does not serve any bandits here, but he said that he is a regular customer. Hyung-gu looked at him in surprise, asking what he was saying there. Had he really lost his fear? But Do-kyung's face was serious. Then Hong-gu approached him, took his face, because it seemed familiar to him, and asked if he had attacked their guys from Huck. He asked how he dared to do this, otherwise he had an extra life lying around in his pocket. However, Do-kyung was not going to play the role of the victim and listen to his jokes. Now he asked how it was possible to be called Hook. He took one of Hong-gu's hands and put a knife to his hand, asking if he shouldn't be one-armed if he was in Hook. A terrifying scream was heard from the diner, and the men from Hook who had remained outside hurried inside. Hong-gu cursed, asking how Do-kyung even dared to do something like that, because if Gorang found out about this, he would be in trouble. However, he asked in response why this should bother him, because they are Daesun, so he could run to cry to his Gorang. Members of Hook burst into the establishment. They hurried to pick up the boss, first going to the hospital because he had a cut-off finger. Jin Woong asked if he would just let them go like that, but Do-kyung said that he too just sat and watched as these guys were beaten. He noticed that the store was full of dust and didn't even have a menu, which meant Jin Woong had no plans to do business. He said that he just wanted to get rid of the bandits, and he had just helped him with it, so now he wanted to join him. Jin Woong asked if he even knew who his opponent was, but Do-kyung again said that they were Daesung, so it didn't matter. Then Jin Woon handed him a rubber band on his fist, telling him to tie his hair with it, because he looked like a butcher. Do-kyung thanked him, but said that he really couldn't do business here. Now Jin Woon was again looking at the same elastic band that he now always wore for Mr. Beck. Now, however, this was no longer necessary, because he was dead, and his younger brother, with whom he had just fought, had come in his place. He sighed, thinking about how different the twins were, but he liked Do-kyung's character better. Hong-gu sat in the chair and wanted to scratch his head, but again discovered that he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. He swore loudly, saying that he couldn't get used to it, remembering the one who did this to him. He couldn't forget the pain and humiliation of the last 4 years, so he decided that today was the day for revenge. He said that Daisung left the general meeting and is now powerless, so today they will destroy the Daisang group. The men who were part of the Gurang group unanimously supported the boss's idea. Their total number was 50 people. Suddenly, they heard someone pounding on the door, and they looked there, asking what it could be. But they soon found out for themselves, because the door swung open sharply, and they saw an unfamiliar guy hit one of them. The others stood in confusion, not understanding who dared to attack them at such a time, because they were part of Gorang. But the man, whom they initially thought was a guy because of his ridiculous hat, walked inside as if he was not afraid at all. He had bright blue eyes and pierced ears. He took his hat to take it off, and the men suddenly recognized him as Boris. Boris worked as an ordinary builder. That day he was asked if he had seen who did such a dirty trick. The head of the construction site pointed somewhere on the wall, asking who could have thought of such an absurdity. A huge graffiti was painted on the wall in the form of a 5-angled star, which was now displayed there. But Boris did not answer the main thing. He looked away, for some reason thinking about something of his own. Meanwhile, Xi'an clarified some details from the biography of this man with Yi Su. They were near the garages and were talking about him. Xi'an said that the man had a nickname, Sheepdog, and asked if he had not returned to Russia. But Yi Su answered in the negative, saying that he was hiding as a foreign worker and now he was here. This was the first man on his list of people with the help of whom he was going to create his own organization. His name was Boris. He was from the Russian MAFIA, a security inspector and the boss's hound, also known as the Sheepdog. He saw Yi Su in the garages and rushed at him with a knife when he called him by name. Xi'an then doubted whether such a person would want to work with them, because his nickname alone was already frightening. Yi Su took out the flash drive and put it in front of the attacking Boris to attract his attention. It worked, and the man stopped with a knife to his throat, but Yi Su said that he had come to make a deal with him. He showed him the flash drive, and it was clear that the man understood a little what was being said, so he took the knife from his throat. He took off his helmet, revealing his bald head, on which was a strange tattoo. He had a hole on his head with red claws protruding from it. The tattoo was called a demon in a human mask. It looked really creepy, and in this form he appeared before Honggu and the members of his organization. But Haeonggu did not take him seriously, saying that such an obstacle was unacceptable on the day of Daisan's destruction. He ordered to deal with him. 2 men attacked Boris, but he didn't even lift a finger, which surprised them a little. But they quickly realized where he had so much confidence and power, because he pointed the barrel of the gun at the attackers. Of course, it was a real pistol, because who needs fights if everything can be solved with a couple of shots? He struck with an incomprehensible side blow from the handle, but it turned out to be a powerful blow, and the man who took it instantly fell back. Another of the attackers stood in amazement. He still could not believe that they were confronted by an armed enemy. He decided to quickly take out a knife in order to quietly attack the impudent man, but he was already aiming at his head. He called them idiots, saying that no weapon would have time to damage him because he would send a bullet faster than that. For now, he held back, and seeing that the man was distracted by his words, he hit him in the face with his free hand. The rest of Huck also rushed to the attack, saying that it would be better if they attacked all together. Some even managed to grab Boris by the arms, preventing him from taking proper aim and firing a shot. Another one grabbed him in a chokehold, trying to squeeze his huge neck, but Boris didn't seem to care. Suddenly, he bit the hand of the one who was trying to choke him, grabbing his teeth under his jacket and shirt. Of course, his clothes prevented him from missing the skin a little, but the man still felt something, and he really didn't like it. He swung his free hand to hit the insolent shooter, but he only gave him a strange look. A moment, and the man found himself on the ground, and Boris stood over him. Now it was his turn to perform techniques. He took the knife, which fell from the other man's hand when he tried to get it, and turned to his victim. With one hand, he grabbed his face, and with the other, he gripped the knife, holding it near the head of the man who was already losing consciousness. Suddenly, he plunged the blade into his body, but the poor fellow did not even have time to scream, as Honggu watched, who was gripped by horror. Raising his bloody-gloved hand, he said that people raise demons to hide their weakness. Before Honggu had time to answer anything, Boris's hand had already fallen on his head, and he was overcome with even greater horror. Boris again clutched the knife nearby, asking if there was a demon inside him, while his gaze was essentially like a demon. At that moment, Xi'an ran into the establishment, quickly found Boris with his eyes and told him to stop. He said that he did a good job, and the bald man seemed to listen to him, moving the knife away from Honggu. Hookah's boss said that they were actually from Gorang, but Xi'an only said that then everything was clear, saying that they themselves were from Daisan. Shi-on dialed Yi-Su, saying that the director of HK Kidal from Gorang Group was captured, referring to Heung-gu. He wondered if Taeson was really so global, and Shi-on, meanwhile, said that with Boris it really turned out to be easier. Speaking of simplicity, he told the commander that he knew about Boris's skills, but whether they could control him, he was against it. But Yi-Su simply agreed that the man had good skills, adding that moreover, he would do anything for some price. Now they were speaking for another member of their potential organization, but Shi-on doubted him too, saying that such a capitalist was unlikely to suit them. Then the guy with a knife attacked Yi-Su, who came to talk about joining his organization, and Su managed to get his knife, and this allowed him to defend himself. The one who attacked him asked what he was doing here and who sent him. He was a North Korean spy and asked who he was and who sent him because he was very worried about it. Lee Kyung-chun, 17, was a North Korean secret agent, also known as Weasel, who was the subject of NAR surveillance and on the run. Suddenly, he took away his knife, but only to transform it because it turned out to be a butterfly knife. Despite his young age, he was quite good at it, so Yi-Su had to dodge his attacks. He fought to the fullest, because the guy should not be underestimated. Although he was young, he was very capable. Suddenly, he managed to knock the knife out of Yi-Su's hand, and it flew away a fair distance. In addition, the guy was even able to wound him, but Yi-Su only greeted him, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. It was clear that the guy was surprised by this. He even asked him what he said, because it turned out that he knew him. This young guy killed all his colleagues and superiors when he fled to the south, so now he did not understand how Yi-Su could know his name. His memories took him 3 years ago to the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Then they got together, and the man in uniform introduced himself as Lee Woo-chan, a major in the General Intelligence Bureau. They were still very young, and he asked them if they knew where they were now and what kind of place it was. Having heard no answer, he said that this is the place where the North and South unite for profit, the Kaesong Industrial Complex. He said that they create goods in North Korea and send them to South Korea to earn a living, in a word, doing dirty work. He asked if they understood what capitalism was, saying that these idiots from the South didn't even take them seriously. Many things have been done in the North, but what they have done is not just a product of capitalism. They made people who could bite their necks like animals. This is how they raised them. In the eyes of each of these children, there was no compassion for man, but only a killer instinct. Their special name is Laska. It was their duty and mission to protect their fatherland. The plan for training juvenile operatives was to work at an industrial complex during the day and train undercover agents at night. Kaesong was in close proximity to South Korea, so children were sent along with the goods. But there was a flaw in this plan. He was called out by a man who called him by name, which was rare under their regime. In one hand, he held a box with something tasty inside, and in the other, he had a pack of the same delicacy. He put the box in front of the boy, telling him to snack on this because he was already working a lot. He told him to eat slowly and did not forget to share with his friends, and the guy was already greedily chewing on the tasty treats. The taste of capitalism revealed by the Kaesong Industrial Complex tempted these children, and this was especially true for Kyung-chun because he was quite poor. 2 years later, they were still training, their training only becoming more rigorous and brutal. The commanders who observed them said that it would take about 2 years to complete their ideological education. However, the chief commander said that everything should end this week. They had to bring the guys into action already by this time. He explained that it was an order from above, although he personally didn't like it either, but they had no choice. Kyung-chun asked his uncle if everything was okay, because from his face he could understand that something had happened. He put his hands out, and the man remembered that he had promised him cookies, but asked him to wait a little, because the goods would only be delivered to him in the evening. He still found one cookie, and he gave it to the lucky guy, but said that he would still have to wait until night. And at night, Kyung-chun was already performing another task, still holding the cookie in his hand. Tears involuntarily rolled down from his eyes. One of his comrades told him to hurry up and leave that cookie, because in South Korea he could eat his fill of them. They said that first they need to take care of the driver, who turned out to be the guy who gave Kyung-chun cookies. Kyung-chun asked how they were going to take care of him, to which the guys asked if he really thought that he would just give them a ride. He protested, telling them to stop because there had to be another way, but the guy had already opened the door, saying they didn't have time for this. He asked what they could be talking about, but before he could finish speaking, Kyung-chun cut his throat. He repeated that he had already said to give him some time, he would find another way, but the guy was already dead. The rest of his comrades looked at him in surprise and horror, and he asked them what had happened. They were silent, and now he began to worry, asking if they really didn't agree with him. He opened the driver's door, looking inside and addressing his uncle, who was still sleeping. He asked if he could give him a lift to South Korea, and he had such a genuine smile on his face that he couldn't resist. But in fact, before that he killed all his comrades, and now he was alone trying to move to the south, saying that it would be more suitable for him. Major Lee Woo-chan approached the man, and he asked him not to do this, although he understood that he was doomed. He asked why he did this to his comrades, since it was 3:30, and everyone, including the special instructor, was killed by Lee Kyung-chun. At 3:55, there was an intervention by a secret agent who infiltrated during Lee Kyung-chun's sudden actions. This agent turned out to be Bak Yi-soo, and Kyung-chun has since been called Weasel, and he has become the object of surveillance. This was the end of his report. He cut the commander's throat, and another of his infiltrations was successfully completed. Returning to the present, he pointed a butterfly knife at Kyung-chun's throat, praising his skills, saying that this was only taught in North Korea. Then the guy raised his hands and said that he wondered if he really was from the north, which he had no doubt about, because he was able to take his knife. Yi-soo said that in fact, he had been following the guy for quite a long time, and he asked if he was going to kill him. He said that it was very suspicious then, so he asked what he wanted from him, if he didn't come to kill. Yi-soo took out his favorite chocolate chip cookies, saying that he came to offer him a deal. After hearing about the deal, Kyung-chun took the cookie from him, and his eyes lit up, saying that it was quite a capitalistic approach. Meanwhile, Tae-hyun was relaxing at the Gorang Group headquarters, Red Crown Hotel. Suddenly, he threw a bottle of expensive wine at the man who was reporting the situation, and he came with bad news. Tae-hyun asked how it was that 3 hotels from their organization had already closed in just half a day. The reporter apologized and added that the district administration also said that nothing could be done. But Tae-hyun asked why they didn't find out everything themselves then, because they had to do it, and he grabbed the man by the ear. He asked why he even needed such untalented members like them, but at that moment, another one of their Gorang groups ran in. The man reported that Daesan had attacked Kruk, lending from Hanam-dong, and Tae-hyun realized who was behind it all. He ordered everyone to get ready, saying that they were going to march on Daesan in Hanam-dong. They were walking along the corridor, but suddenly their attention was attracted by a guy who appeared out of nowhere and was now watching them. He mockingly asked if the Gorang men were boasting that they were bandits, because in his opinion, this was a lie. Then Tae-hyun saw him, and his face contorted with displeasure because he recognized this guy as the ghost. He held one of the guards hostage and then said that he apparently broke his arm, so he apologized. This was very disrespectful towards the Gorang group and Tae-hyun, so he swung his brass knuckles at the impudent man. Even though he was a first-class killer, Tae-hyun could not allow his organization to be humiliated so brazenly. But the ghost only dodged the attack, which infuriated him even more. But then another man appeared, apologizing to Tae-hyun. It was Chief Zhang, who apologized, saying that his guys can be quite obnoxious, adding that he heard that Grang was having problems with her business. He said that if Tae-hyun listened to a few of his requests, they could help him with this. Then Tae-hyun realized that his hotels closed because of them, and not because of Daesung. He pushed back his chair, agreeing to talk. Still holding the brass knuckles in his hand, he asked if they were really going to beg him for mercy. The ghost, who was sitting opposite, laughed, asking for forgiveness, because he could not get used to their gangster style of communication. He said that at this rate, Tae-hyun will really run into trouble someday and pay with his life. He was about to get up, asking how he dared to talk like that, but Zhang stopped him by making a proposal. He told the director to calm down, saying that he really was far from in an advantageous position. He explained that it was not he who should ask him for a favor, but that he should beg him for help, while his face changed. Everyone knows that the wolf is one of the strongest predators of the canine family. Of course, he is smaller than the same predators, like a bear, a lion, or a tiger, but this did not bother him. After all, nevertheless, he was able to become the strongest, surpassing them all. After all, unlike other predators, he hunts and lives in a pack, and this is a huge advantage, in fact. They also have one individual who leads this pack, and such an individual represents charisma. Such an individual is called a leader. He was the main one in the pack, and the rest of the members obeyed him, because he was the leader. The Gorang trading group could also be compared to a pod, and its name meant giant whale. And in Gorang, such a leader is Ryu Tae-hyun. He told Zhang that he said funny things so that they, Gorang, would beg him for something. However, he only phlegmatically lit a cigarette, asking what Gorang had to do with it, which greatly puzzled Tae-hyun. Zhang reached into his pocket, saying that their organization touched many areas of activity, from loans to the hotel business. But in the end, they're just pathetic bandits, aren't they? As he said this, he took a pistol out of his jacket. He said that, unfortunately, A hunter with a gun came to the pack of wolves from Goreng, who was now in front of them. A special squad was already standing behind him, and Zhang said that they are different from them, amateurs, because they are professionals. But his people also managed to gather behind Taehyun, and he said that in this case, they should declare war. However, Chief Zhang was not at all frightened by such statements. He repeated it again so that Taehyun would calm down and listen to him. He said that it was time for them to get down to business, and with these words he took out some kind of folder with documents. He handed the folder to Taehyun, who took a look at its contents, but he clearly didn't like it. He carefully studied the document and then looked at his boss with contempt. He asked if he really thought that he would fall for it, because everything was suspiciously tempting, and the one-sink inscription was on the document. He asked why Zhang offered them such a good project, because he knows that if they go to the bottom, they will definitely be together. However, the boss said that it was a business proposal, because they would introduce them to the workforce, which he repeated was a pro. But Taehyun said that he only talks about his professionals. He tore up his proposal. He added that they need to feel confident that they can be trusted to run a business, and he suggested looking at their abilities. Shi-on stood on the street and tried to call one person, but he did not answer, and this worried him a little. He looked at the time and saw that their meeting should have started a long time ago, but he still wasn't there. He wrote to him where he was hanging out, whether he had fallen asleep, because they agreed to meet at that time. But there was no answer. Then he called the commander, asking what he should do now, because the one they were waiting for never showed up. Yi-Su, who was in a different location, received the signal through the receiver in his ear, asking if it could be heard. He told Shi-on to wait a little, because perhaps he would call him back. But for now he, Yi-Su, was a little busy with Weasel. Hearing about Weasel, Shi-on exhaled into the phone in surprise, asking if they had any problems along the way. He doubted whether the kid was useful at all, but he only said that because he didn't know his abilities. He deftly jumped towards two men who crossed their path and did not want to let them pass, and then took out his knife. They didn't even have time to react before he had already slashed them in the throat, and was now deftly returning back to Yi-Su. He said with a smile that to kill you just need to put pressure on the settlement, and this was indeed true. Seeing this, Yi-Su responded positively to Shi-on, saying that this little guy was useful and would still be useful to their organization. However, Shi-on asked if he was still too young for such serious matters, since the guy was only 17. But Yi-Su said that it was just right, asking in response if the person Shi-on was supposed to have a meeting with would be useful to them. Suddenly, one of the bandits, whom they had just managed to avoid, attacked him, but, as it turned out, not for long. He swung the knife right next to his face, so Yi-Su barely had time to dodge, moving a little to the side. Then he grabbed the attacker by the hand, and the characteristic instinct of a killer appeared in his eyes. He broke the man's wrist, and he, screaming in pain, sank to the ground while the others looked at them in surprise. But Shi-on continued to talk to him on the phone, telling him about the person he was supposed to meet. He said that while the commander was in North Korea, he was sent to the Middle East as part of the US Army, and he definitely didn't learn English there. He said that there he met a group of rangers on motorcycles, but before continuing, he asked if the commander was listening to him. He said that he was listening, and Shi-on continued, saying that among them, there was one capable person named Deadline. He said he was something of an errand boy who would do whatever was asked as long as he was paid well. Yi-Su asked if this was so, and Shi-on once again confirmed, saying that he was ready to do anything for money. Kyung-chun Yi-Su said that they need to keep moving, because today they must get rid of at least one more Gorang subsidiary organization. Thus, they made their first move by destroying their best and strongest subsidiaries. Shi-on said that he would start his operation and then join them when he finished, and the commander agreed. He had just finished the conversation when someone threw an axe in his direction, which almost reached his face. But Yi-Su, with a strong and deft movement, grabbed the axe and moved it to the side, protecting his face. He thought that it seemed that these people were faster than he thought, but that was not a problem for him and Kyung-chun. The man who threw the axe was very surprised that the guy was able to catch him, because he thought it would take him by surprise. It was Kim Do-hwan, the director of the Doki Doki Night organization, part of the Gorang group, and he asked how they dare to attack Gorang. But Yi-Su only told Weasel to deal with him, because he was just an amateur, and he, with a cookie in his mouth, already rushed at the man. He missed it by just a split second because two other men blocked their boss. One of them swung a knife, and Kyung-chun dodged, but the blade passed near his mouth, cutting the cookie. This surprised the guy. He said that these guys, it turns out, are masters. It looks like they trained in the army. He asked why people like them were on Gorang's side, and the men took a defensive stance. From behind them, Do-hwan's head appeared, and he boasted that these guys were personally sent here by director Ryu Tae-hyun. Well, plus, the same guys should have already arrived in their Daesan, because they are not the only smart people here, so he advised them to return to their headquarters. He said that it was better for them to hurry before Daesan was destroyed into smithereens, but Yi-soo was in no hurry to leave his place. He thought that Chief Zhang was directly related to One-sink, and now he brought Gorang into this to increase his chances. Kyung-chun told him to leave those two masters to him because he would deal with them, and Yi-soo could take care of the director. The guy suddenly started jumping on his feet, saying that there was something that had interested him for a long time, and now he wanted to check it out. He prepared to attack, thinking that of course he was a North Korean spy, but it should work on South Korean masters as well. With this thought, he rushed into the attack, already planning tentative actions for its success. The man he was running towards pulled out a knife to wound the guy, but he hit him in the arm, moving it to the side. Then he held it with his right hand, and in his left he was already twirling his knife, preparing to strike. It was clear that he would succeed. And so it happened, and the knife passed near the throat of the man, who even dropped his weapon in surprise. Blood sprayed from his neck, and the other man was already clutching his knife, because he realized that the guy in front of him was quite dangerous. He lunged at where Kyung-chun's head had been a second ago, but he ducked down, hiding behind the body of the wounded bandit. In an instant, he found himself next to another man, who, like his comrade, did not have time to do anything before he was cut. Having finished with them, the guy turned to Yi-soo, saying that the road was clear, so they should hurry up. Yi-soo was about to help him with the rest, but the boy told him that he could handle it himself, and he could go forward. Yi-soo agreed. Do-hwan, who was pressed against the wall, couldn't help but think how it happened that the elite defenders from the Gorang group were so easily defeated by some guy. And Soo thanked Kyung-chun and hurried to hide, because he still had things to do that he must definitely do. As he ran, he thought about the fact that Chief Zhang was already with Goran, and this happened quite quickly. Tae-hyun admitted that the boss's guys were not bad, but he asked if they would listen to amateurs like Gorang Group. To this, Jang counter-questioned him, asking why he thought they were professionals. It was all quite obvious, because they simply wouldn't work unless they were paid as they were supposed to. Therefore, it doesn't matter who orders them, the main thing is that there is decent payment. A guy on a motorcycle was rushing towards Yi-soo. In this matter, such a guy was a professional among professionals. He had already swung the crowbar, which he held in his free hand. A large group of people had already gathered near the building, each of them armed with bladed weapons. At the same time, a car drove up to them and stopped near the building. Boss Zhang and Ghost were sitting in the car. The latter said that he was still not used to the fact that they were involved in business groups. He said that he was sure that he killed Bak Yi-soo, asking why he was still alive then. But Zhang told him that he should have been convinced of his death and brought the corpse. Then there would definitely be no doubt. He said that if the Phantom had done this, then none of this would be happening now. But nothing can be changed. The Phantom had a strange expression on his face when he heard these words. For some reason, he looked somewhere into the distance for some time, without even blinking. Then he seemed to come back from his trance, slamming his fist into his palm, asking why he really didn't do that. Suddenly he laughed, and his eyes seemed to pop out of his eyeballs. He said that he should have done exactly as the boss said. Seeing that he had already gone crazy, Zhang said that they should not go back to the past, so they should not think about it. Meanwhile, the guy gripped the crowbar even tighter and prepared to strike, swinging with all his strength. Considering that he was on a motorcycle and at high speed, the skill of his blow was surprising, because if not for Yi-soo's knife, he would have already been unconscious. The guy used a crowbar to stop. Now Yi-soo clearly recognized him as Deadline, but he doubted that Xi'an was able to talk to him so quickly. Then a terrible realization struck him that if it wasn't Xi'an, then Chief Zhang had already beaten them to it, and they hired this guy. However, he did not have time to think about it, because new changes appeared and the situation became much worse. The Middle East, Afghanistan, is considered the most dangerous combat zone that can be found in the desert. Vast wilderness and sand dunes were everywhere here, so to overcome these conditions, the 66th Ranger Battalion created a special group that traveled on motorcycles. It was called a Special Group, and it was created by the U.S. Special Operations Command, SOC. One of the Rangers transmitted a signal, calling headquarters. He said that they had managed to return several enemy guns and gunpowder. However, the problem was that even in those days there were variables. This has always been the case. Such people did not consider that they were betraying anyone. They were simply worried about their safety. Therefore, to survive in the midst of these variables, it is necessary to find a reliable way, a method that can ensure their safety without any risks or damage to them. War always means the death of thousands of people, perhaps the most ridiculous thing that humanity has come up with in its history. For example, a group of extremists who sought to advance their interests in a series of riots, or greedy corporations who want to use these interests to achieve their own goals. Many more examples could be given, but something else was completely clear. This style of life was unsteady, because people by nature will always strive to gain more power into their own hands, caring about their safety. In this world, the strong will always dominate the weak. It was, is, and will be, so there is no point in changing anything. It was a most dangerous war zone, where you never knew what you would be met with or what you would be led through. And if you couldn't handle all the variables, your end was as inevitable as nature's cycle. You became a victim in this system. You were eaten by someone who was stronger, and you could no longer do anything about it. Power and authority are not given to everyone, so if someone wanted to get it, he had to go through a rather thorny path. However, if he still managed to overcome it, he became the winner and received the power and knowledge necessary for domination in this world. Sometimes people underestimate others, thinking that those who cannot think like them are fools. However, when these fools returned, their appearance was as unexpected as the misconceptions about their failure. And then the hour of reckoning comes. It is then that it becomes clear who really is the strongest and smartest. It was a simple principle, which, however, for some reason everyone forgot. If you underestimate the enemy, you will pay. Just in such a place, a desert, where not everyone can survive and ensure their safety. The most terrible of the predators was Deadline, who managed to subjugate not only his comrades, but also the enemy. This was a brief description of what Shion said about him, saying that everyone without exception was afraid of the guy. The roar of his motorcycle could be recognized with closed eyes, because there was something frightening and terrible about it. It was impossible to hide or run away from him. The victim could only accept the battle, the outcome of which would determine her life. Now Yisu was such a victim. He knew that meeting Deadline was dangerous, but he found him first. He prepared to attack again, gripping the crowbar tighter and adjusting something on his motorcycle. His left hand, holding a crowbar, was aimed at the enemy's weak points. But unfortunately, Yisu realized it too late. Suddenly, the light that the motorcycle's headlights emitted went out, leaving the two of them to their own devices in almost impenetrable darkness. However, it turned out that the advantage was still on the enemy's side, and Yisu thought that he most likely had adaptation to the dark. He realized that Deadline was using a cunning tactic, first shining bright headlights on him, and then dimming the lights so that Yisu's mind went blank. Suddenly, quiet steps were heard somewhere near him, and only thanks to this, he managed to wave the knife in that direction and protect himself from the blow. The only problem was that Deadline was hitting with a crowbar, and this, as you know, is a fairly strong piece of metal. During the strike, a piece of the blade broke off from Yisu's knife, which flew to the side, and now his weapon was of little use. Moreover, he did not have time to tense his hand in time, so now it was very painful from the unexpected tension. It smelled like kerosene. He didn't know if he would be able to block the enemy's next attacks, so he had to do something about it. Deadline judged him on how he was able to defend at the last second, but now he was going to attack again. Meanwhile, in the main office and at the same time the headquarters of Daesan, the battle between the two organizations was also raging. The men from Daesan continued to fight, telling each other not to retreat and to hold the line to protect their organization. But people from Gorang kept coming and coming, not giving them time to rest and gather their strength. The worst part was that the attack happened just when they couldn't contact the director. The men were cutting each other, waving knives, when suddenly an unfamiliar guy with glasses stepped into the arena. He had a strong build and said that he didn't understand Chief Zhang, asking what was wrong with these thugs. They continued to fight, supporting each other so as not to give up, because this would be the end for the Daesan group. But suddenly, the bespectacled man attacked one of the men, who was fighting hard and cheering on his comrades. The blow was so strong that his knife even fell out. They hit him in the jaw with such force. He fell to the floor, unable to stay on his feet, but did not lose consciousness, and now simply looked furiously at the new bandit. He looked back at him, saying that they were too tough for them, because they were professionals in their field, and they were just a bunch of scum. As if to confirm his words, the men behind him rushed to attack the remaining members of Daesan. The bespectacled boy ordered them to kill all these idiots, but suddenly a strong blow was heard, as if someone had been thrown to the floor. This turned out to be almost true, as Choi Jong-ho joined the fight and unleashed his heavy blow on one of their gorangs. He sighed in annoyance, saying that he just wanted to enjoy his vacation here, but these idiots got in the way. Putting on gloves with metal inserts, he said that since such a thing was happening here, he simply could not help but help. The men from Gorang recognized him. He was one of the 9 knives of Ilhak, which means incredibly strong. They asked each other what he forgot here. The bespectacled boy noticed that his people involuntarily began to retreat, and he decided to look at what frightened them so much. Jong Ho also saw an unfamiliar guy, saying that he did not look like the person from their business. He added that he was sorry that their meeting took place under such circumstances, because the guy looked capable. However, today he, Jong Ho, the deputy head of Gudo, the second knife, was on Daesung's side and fought alongside his members. With that, he took off his white jacket and was now wearing a black shirt, denoting his temporary position in Daesun as the head of the guard. But the guy just chuckled smugly, taking off his glasses. He asked if he was too old for such games. The guy's name was Park Chan-hoon. He was the head of a special forces group. He was dishonorably discharged for violence and mutiny. In the past, the most powerful organization in Seoul, he was a member of it as one of the 9 Knives. In that glorious era, he was Ilhak's main weapon because his strength was known to everyone. He was the pride of the 9 Knives, a man with great potential and his own beliefs, which were built on moral ambushes. And now this man is fighting on the side of Daesung, who in the past was one of the organizations that did not dare to oppose him. The guys from Goreng also could not understand this, but they were gripped by fear and panic because the old man was very dangerous. Then Chang Hong turned to him, saying that since those idiots did not dare to fight him, he would do it. Jong Ho, however, said that he almost managed to offend him, but still the guy lacked good manners. However, he rushed to conclusions, and Chang Hong added more strength. Breaking through his block, he knocked out the big guy. Then he took a stance and began to throw various blows, which confused Jong Ho a little. Then he stepped back for a second, but only to take a running start, and in the blink of an eye he was already running towards the old man. He hit him in the stomach, but to his surprise, the big man was still quite far from old, because he completely absorbed his blow. But then Chang Hoon did not understand this, because Jong Ho bent over, pretending that the blow touched him so that the guy leaned towards him. But at the last moment, Chang Hong noticed this, and without thinking twice, hit him on the head, breaking the plan to capture himself. Meanwhile, Deadline was already back on the motorcycle, the wheels of which were spinning in place, creating clouds of dust. And Sue thought, did he really break his arm? He had to hurry because everything was dragging on too long. Deadline put his hand on the handle of the motorcycle, preparing to attack Yisu again. This time he was confident that he would not dodge. The motorcycle roared and he drove straight towards the commander, who however remained calm and did not even budge. Deadline lifted the motorcycle onto one wheel. It was a direct attack at speed, which meant he had to aim towards the body to defend himself. He bent down, shortening himself from the front wheel, and managed to push the motorcycle a little so that the guy almost flew out of the saddle. But in the next second, he attacked with a crowbar and then managed to stay in the saddle and ride through Yisu. The commander was lucky this time. He remained unharmed, although the attack was very close. However, Deadline had already turned the motorcycle around and was racing towards him again. He was determined to finish off his victim, as he always had before. The wheels created clouds of dust that obscured Yisu's view, and the motorcyclist's hand was already raised for another blow. Suddenly, at the last moment, he shifted his weight to the front wheel and spun the bike, maintaining speed. This time, Yisu only managed to lift his leg from the place where it would have been crushed by the wheel, and he leaned his elbows back a little. Then Deadline swung his crowbar, the speed of his attack being added by the fact that he hit from top to bottom while sitting on the saddle of a bike. Of course, Yisu could not miss such an attack he dodged, but as it turned out, this was just a deception move. Deadline forced him to swerve to get under the rear wheel of the motorcycle, and then he hit him with that wheel. Yisu's cap even fell off and blood appeared on his face, because this was the first time the guy managed to hit him, which means he was really capable. Yisu thought that all his judgments and predictions were wrong. Chief Zhang, Gorang Group, and now this Deadline. And Su should have been more cool-headed and insightful. He needed to observe the enemy and look out for his weaknesses. But for now, Deadline continued to attack, once again starting the motorcycle engine. He again prepared to attack. It was impossible to tell or understand from him what weak points there might be. But Yisu still tried to assess the situation, because that's what he was taught in training. He realized that his rear wheel was smoking due to friction. Now the smoke completely blocked the view, but not for Deadline, because he seemed to feel confident with such visibility. Yisu no longer had a knife, so he took a stance, wondering where the next attack would be, because his wound was on the right. Variables are called variables because they cannot be predicted or calculated. However, not all variables change the situation for the worse, because it happens that help comes unexpectedly. He heard a familiar voice asking if these were really the methods of professionals, because back then, Yisu was not as cool as he thought. In surprise, Yisu saw Jin Woon take off his jacket and walk towards him, covering him with his large body. He asked if an amateur like him could join them, and that was another variable. Meanwhile, in Daesan, an equally interesting fight between an amateur and a professional was planned. Park Chang-hoon was stretching his stiff neck, and the men from Daesan looked on in surprise and a little fear as he hit Jung-ho. The guy turned to him, asking the old man if he was still alive, because the difference in their strength could be fatal for him. But to his surprise, the big man remained standing. It even seemed that now he was even more terrible than before. This made Chang-hoon hurry up, because he didn't understand how such a bandit could have such a physical form. He thought that he needed to finish with him quickly, but at that very moment, Jong-ho's fist was near his face. He managed to dodge, but was amazed at his speed and reflexes at that age, because the blow could have been decisive for him. Such a fast attack did not match his size, so Chang-hong knew that he had to increase the distance between them. He jumped away from the thug, but he attacked him again, saying that he had been in a terrible mood lately, because bastards like them tried to interfere in the affairs of their gangs. With these words, he planted his fist straight into Chang-hoon's stomach. He became noticeably nervous, because it seemed that the old man's patience had run out, and now he intended to let off steam. He rushed at him again, and this time Chang-hoon had to defend himself. He pulled out a knife, pointing it at the old man. However, this did not even bother him. He ignored the knife, hitting the guy with all his strength in the face so that his knife fell out and blood began to appear. However, this was not the end. He watched in horror as the big man grabbed his face as if he wanted to break his jaw. Chang-hoon ducked down from the severe pain in his stomach. His face also hurt, and Jong-ho, who was holding him, asked if he understood everything. He continued to squeeze his face, asking if he really thought he could do anything to them. He again began to talk about Il-hak's former strength, but Chang-hoon, with the last of his strength, grabbed another knife, intending to cut his hand. However, Jong-ho naturally saw this. He took the knife with his free hand, saying that the guy turned out to be not very smart. The big man pulled his knife away and even squeezed it a little. Then Chang-hong noticed with horror that he was wearing Kevlar gloves. This material had great strength and was used for body armor, and Jung-ho only gripped his face tighter. He threw the guy to the floor, accompanying his fall to the end so that he hit his face, and blood again spurted out in all directions. He no longer stood up, lying on the floor, and Jong-ho said that it would be better for such professionals not to show themselves at all. He asked how he felt about the fight and whether it was as easy as he said at the beginning, because now he was lying on the floor unconscious. Wu Yi-su, meanwhile, the battle was just beginning, this time with reinforcements in the form of Jin Woon. The big man from Daesan, noticing that he was holding his hand, asked if he had bruised or broken it, which was even worse. However, the commander said that he was fine, saying that Daesung was more important. But Jin Woong replied that there was no need to worry. After all, Daesan was now in good hands, so they should also try. He rolled up his sleeves. Yi-su said that the guy in front of them was a real pro, but Jin Woon interrupted him, saying that he was already tired of listening to this record. But he decided to explain later, because now he needed to deal with this impudent motorcyclist. Yi-su immediately warned him, saying that it was dangerous to rush at him recklessly, but Jin Woon replied that he was thinking too much. He wrapped his jacket around his hand, saying that first he should try to hit at least once. Deadline seemed unfazed by the appearance of another man, because this was just another victim. He rushed towards them again. Jin Woong only dug himself deeper into the ground, saying that this is what Director Baek said, "No, Mr. Baek Do-kyung." The motorcycle was rapidly approaching. They were preparing to strike each other, one with a crowbar and the other with a fist. He thought back to that meeting at the diner when Do-kyung first said those words, and now he completely shared them. He prepared to attack, swinging his wrapped fist and gathering all his strength for the blow. He hit the motorcycle body right in the center, and the impact was so strong that the bike stopped. Deadline clearly did not expect such strength from his new victim. It even made him fly out of the saddle. He managed to group himself in time and land next to the motorcycle, whose wheels continued to spin. But Jin Woon did not give him time to resume, and again swung his crushing blow. This time he hit his opponent, who flew back and dropped the crowbar, so now the advantage was on the side of Yi-su and Jin Woong. The latter approached the director, saying that someday solving the problem using Baek Do-kyung's method could make him a real Baek Do-kyung. Yi-su looked at him in surprise, although he understood what he was trying to tell him, remembering his brother. Jin Woon also knew that the director understood everything perfectly, but he still wanted to remind him of it. If you think about it, it all started in childhood. When Yi-su was 11 years old, he remembered how he cried then. His brother Do-kyung was always different from him in that he never cried, unlike little Yi-su. Then he asked if he didn't tell him that he would beat him if he cried again, and all because the guys from the 6th grade bullied him. Although he and his brother were twins and also the same age, the older brother was very different from him, the weakling. He was stronger than other guys and even defeated guys who were older and taller than him. He simply had no fear. And he, as a younger brother, didn't like it at all, because in comparison with him, he was nothing. His brother defeated all the bullies who bullied Yisu, and although it was right, Yisu felt that he was losing to him in everything. Nothing changed when they entered school, and literally the next day, Do-kyung started another fight. They were in the same class, but Yisu focused more on his studies while his brother continued to get himself into trouble. Then they were 15 years old. Their views on life were already very different, but they still worried about each other. Onlookers from his class stuck to the windows, watching his brother, because he always fought bravely into the last. They saw other guys who had something broken or bandaged, and then everyone noticed Baek Do-kyung. Over the course of 4 years, he became even stronger, and even then, in his image, one could read something related to the ability to gather people around him. He stood in front of other guys who apparently were going to confront him and his guys. Suddenly, another guy appeared and asked why only 3 of them came, because now they made him look like a bully. This was a high school student. Besides, he clearly knew how to fight well, and now he was heading straight towards Do-kyung. One of those who watched this scene from the classroom said that this must be a martial artist. He really had a well-trained body. He was already equal to Do-kyung and was head and shoulders above him. He said that he gave his friends advice, but apparently the guys still didn't listen to him and paid the price. However, Do-kyung was not bothered by this at all. He called the guy by name, asking if he had already graduated from school. He again asked why the hell he came here then. Did he really learn nothing after graduation? His last words were an instruction to follow him, because he did not want to start a fight in the middle of the school. Everyone who was near them at that moment watched their conversation in surprise, but no one intervened. One of the guys who was on Do-kyung's side, and who had already been beaten by this high school student once, wanted to go too. But Do-kyung raised his hand, stopping him, saying that he would go alone. Besides, in this state the guy would only get in the way. At this moment, Yisu approached the window, who also became curious about who his brother was going to fight with this time. They walked behind the school, so no one saw Do-kyung suddenly kneel down, bowing his head to the ground. He asked the high school student for forgiveness, saying that he acted rashly under the influence of the atmosphere. The guy did not expect such a turn, because he was already prepared to have a good fight with this impudent person. But Do-kyung continued, saying that he respects him so much, and that he heard that he studied at Jaewon High School, where he probably also kept everyone in fear. The guy was a little perplexed, because he definitely didn't expect compliments addressed to him, and even from this kid. But ultimately, he liked his humility, saying that at first he thought of making him a cripple, but now he changed his mind. He said that Do-kyung made him laugh, so he will let him live and hurt his friends instead of him. He asked the guy how he liked this deal, but Do-kyung looked at him completely differently and stopped bowing. Clenching his pen in his fist, he replied that this would not work, and that he needed to knock it into the high school student's head once. The guy, naturally, did not understand what he was talking about, but the very next moment, Do-kyung jumped on his leg, sticking his hand into his shoe. It felt like a nail had gone through his leg, and he screamed in pain, clutching at it. Meanwhile, Do-kyung took advantage of his lack of composure and kicked him in the face. He said that his classmate Ji-hoon delivers newspapers every morning, and at first he, Do-kyung, laughed because it was so terribly old-fashioned. But one day, this high school student beat him up for the same reason, and now he was angry because Ji-hoon was a good guy. One of those who came to watch the fight of their main man attacked him, asking what kind of nonsense he was telling now. Do-kyung caught his blow with his elbow bent and asked if the alumni were having too much fun lately. He added that each of them probably had brothers and sisters who also went to junior school, so why didn't that stop them? Why did they still continue to mock those who were weaker and younger? He pressed on the painful point, and the guy fell holding his hand, and at that time, the others also attacked Do-kyung. 2 of them grabbed him by the arms, and the third raised his hand to hit him. However, even in this position, Do-kyung was able to dodge, throwing his head back as much as possible, and with his free hand, he was already reaching for the guy. He grabbed him by the hair, saying that he remembered something and forgot to tell him earlier. One of the people holding him was surprised that he could still move, because that meant he was stronger. He hit the guy he was holding with his head in the face, but that way it hurt him too. He was still being held, and the guys decided to attack all together because he didn't have a chance against a joint attack. But Do-kyung, instead of answering, showed them the middle finger, saying that if they touch him or his friends again, then they are dead. And Soo hated his brother, who ran forward and did not look at his feet, hated him for the actions that he committed. But he also regretted decisions that he himself had not made, and he had accumulated quite a few of them. That is why he then came to the aid of his brother, just as he had once helped him. and Su was jealous of his brother and wanted to become like him, not in appearance but in character, because he was much better. After all, they were siblings, so no matter what difficulties came their way, together they could always overcome them. Then Do Kyung asked him what he was doing here, to which Yi Su responded in a slightly strange way. He showed him his fists, saying that he was constantly studying a damn lot, but could not understand anything. Do Kyung understood everything and also put out his fist, after which they dealt with the older guys together. As they were leaving, Do Kyung asked what Yi Su wanted to be when he graduated, but he said he didn't know yet. And now he already knew for sure, because in fact he had answered this question a long time ago. He wanted to become like Bak Do Kyung, his brother. The deadline was lying on the ground. The motorcycle was lying to the side. The same was with the crowbar, which means the victory was for Daesang. But Yi Su continued to think about his brother. He thought that little by little he was beginning to be like him. However, this was not so. They are completely different people, although they look similar to each other. He said that he never knew what his brother was really like, although he lived side by side with him almost all his life. It seemed to him that he would never be able to become like him, no matter how hard he tried and no matter how much effort he put in. Then Jin-un approached him, who said that he could help in this matter. He said that he would tell him what kind of person Baek Do-kyung really was. He then bent his knee to Yi Su, saying that he would personally place him on the pedestal where his brother had previously shown. Jong-ho patted his gloves to get rid of the mixture of blood and dust from the fight with the Gorang thugs. He put one hand behind the other's elbow, doing a warm-up and saying that he's had enough of these fights. It's time to retire. But then he remembered his director from Ilhak, who would lose the main weapon of his organization if he left. He wondered whether it was worth making such a radical decision, because it was still too early for him to retire. Then he turned to the men who were still left, telling them to hurry up because he still had things to do. He said that they were so young but so slow, but at that moment the Phantom appeared behind him. Meanwhile, Deadline had also already recovered from Jin Woong's blow, which was a pretty clear indication of his strength. He walked up to the motorcycle, preparing to mount again, and Jin Woong gave him credit, saying that he was turning out to be a tough nut to crack. He asked Yi Su who this guy was, but the commander didn't know anything about him either, except that he served in the US Army. Their conversation was interrupted by Deadline himself, who pointed to the broken glass of his headlight, asking what the thug was going to do about it now. But the big guy was more surprised that the guy spoke Korean, because he didn't even have a special accent. Not hearing an answer to his question, he twisted the crowbar like the butterfly knife that Kyung Chun had. He was already back in the saddle of the motorcycle, preparing to run into them once again, this time carrying out an attack. However, Jin Woon only moved a little away from the place where he flew last time, and again planted his feet firmly on the ground. He clenched his fist and said that since this was the case, there was no need to hold back. He had not fought in such a state for a long time. Deadline was about to step on the gas when he suddenly heard the phone vibrate in the side pocket of his jacket. This made him stop, and although his eyes were not visible behind the helmet, they widened a little. He had an old push-button phone, but it was enough for him. Vibration meant a new SMS, and he opened the message. It stated that the Gorang organization had deposited 20,000 won in advance into his account, and the rest would come when he completed the task. Below, they sent him the required address, and he started the motorcycle to begin his new task. He turned the motorcycle around, and Yi Su and Jin Woon stood and looked in surprise as their opponent left the battlefield. Finally, Deadline pointed his finger at Jin Woong, saying that he remembered the bastard who broke the headlight. With these words, the motorcycle roared, and Deadline, looking at them one last time, rode away. Jin Woong said that he thought that he would fight after such words, but Yi Su replied that his work here was probably already over. Or there was another reason. He received a larger order, because the one who paid the most ruled over people like him. Meanwhile, silence fell in Daesang's main office as a battle broke out between Second Knife Choi Jung-ho and the Ghost Assassin. The rest of the men simply watched silently. Neither Gorang nor Tyson dared to interfere in their battle. Everyone had different experiences in the service of the organization, but such a battle was rarely seen. Even the most experienced agents understood this, including Jang Soo-bin, who even postponed his vacation. Jung-ho's glove had traces of the blood of different men on it, and now he was going to leave another professional's mark on it. He delivered a powerful uppercut to the Phantom, and it seemed that he would no longer get up after this. But this guy seemed strange and alarming to the old man, because he waved the knife masterfully, even managing to hit him a couple of times. To end it, it was necessary to find the right moment and end everything in one fell swoop. However, the Phantom had his own opinion on this matter. He looked at him with his furious gaze, saying that Grandpa would not defeat him like that. Seeing his face, Jin Woon tensed, because the guy showed no fear at all, and this was alarming. He managed to notice how the enemy shifted his weight to his left leg, which meant preparation for an attack. This is what allowed him to put his hands out for protection, which saved him from damaging his internal organs. The speed of the enemy was amazing. Jong-ho barely managed to avoid the fatal blow, but his glove was cut. He began to analyze the enemy, because as soon as he prepared to repel his attack, he changed its trajectory. Now he realized that he had underestimated the guy, and now it was not about protection that he needed to worry about. Before him stood a real killer who masterfully wielded a knife, and also seemed to have mental problems. As if to confirm this, Ghost suddenly burst out laughing, saying that Baek Yi-soo was looking at him with the same face. Jong-ho swung again, but the blow missed. The guy moved incredibly fast, not allowing himself to be caught. He went behind the old man, saying that this would not work, and he needed to move faster if he wanted to get him. He pounced on him from behind, twirling his karambit for a fatal attack, intent on finishing the big man off. But Jong-ho put out his hand, catching his knife, although it was incredibly sharp and could easily cut even special matter. But the man believed that he would not break as long as he was protecting something important. He hit the enemy again. However, the Phantom put his hand behind his elbow, looking at him in bewilderment, saying that Grandpa was pathetic if this was all he was capable of. Suddenly, he threw his head back, still laughing, and pressed on the joint of his arm, almost breaking the bone. Jong-ho felt this well, but he no longer had the strength to do anything to free himself. The ghost attacked again. This time he jumped at him, bringing his knee out to strike him in the head. However, at the last second, a signal was sounded for all employees to retreat, forcing him to stop. He asked why they were retreating now, when Daesan was almost defeated. But the signal only repeated itself once again. Those who remained from the Garanga began to retreat little by little, and only the ghost remained in place. Chang Hong approached him, saying that the thugs from the top of Gorang had changed plans, so there was an order to retreat. He said that it seemed that this was part of the new plan, and they apparently also had a role to play. But the ghost was not satisfied with this explanation. He grabbed Chong-hoon by the hair, asking if they would really obey the government. He said that he was playing with fire, shifting from side to side between his rulers. He grabbed the walkie-talkie from his pocket, telling the person on the other end that the fun was just beginning, and this time, he had to finish off Daesang. But the boss told him to stop fooling around and obey the order to retreat. Jong explained that their all-powerful CEO Tai-hyun claimed that he had some idea. It was already dawn when Yi-soo and Jin-woon arrived at Daesan's office. They immediately saw signs of a fight outside the building. Jin-woon saw Jung-ho's bandaged hand, running up to him. He asked who could inflict such injuries on him. Tai-hyun told Chief Zhang his idea, saying that in such cases, you need to act tough. Weasel couldn't tie his tie at all. He continued to chew the cookie, asking Xion for help with this accessory. He just sighed loudly, telling the guy to come up to him, and he himself thought that apparently this was not taught in North Korea. The guy came up, saying that he had never worn a suit before, because his decoration was his signature butterfly knife. While Xion was tying his tie, Boris walked up to the table, taking a large bread knife, and Xion had to stop him too. Overall, the guy had to look after each new member of their organization, and it was tiring. Jin-woon and Jong-ho did little to help him with this, so all responsibility for order in the group lay with him. But this was not always the case, because when the director came, order was restored by itself, and it was the same this time. Yi-soo entered the room along with Su-ah. They were also in full dress, and he was pleased with the general mood. He suggested that from now on they should splurge like real bandits, because now they were one too. He sat down in a chair, with his legs spread the same way his brother had when starting a conversation, and asked where to start. Jung-ho stood outside the car, asking if Jin-woon was going to send him away like that after everything he had done for them. To which Jin-woon replied that he did not drive him away, because he could leave at any time. But Jong-ho said that he was just joking and already wanted to return. Then Jin-woon decided to ask him if he wanted to stay a little longer in Daesan, at least for the period of his recovery. But he just put his hand on his shoulder, saying that he understood what he was getting at, but he still couldn't do that. He said that he actually realized something from seeing how Daesang transformed, but it was just the beginning. As he watched the new members and how their organization now worked, he began to think about his own. He said that this was not the end, and one day Il-hak would also rise from his knees, returning to his former glory. That's why he had to come back. After saying this, he smiled, saying that his vacation was over. Now it's time to return home to his organization, where the guys have probably already been waiting for him. Meanwhile, the battle at the Nine Knives headquarters had also ended, and now Hyungnim was on his knee, unable to continue it. He asked those who attacked them if they really thought that Il-hak would give up so easily, because they were the best of the best. However, so far everything indicated the opposite, because all the members of Gudo were lying defeated on the floor. Only Hyungnim remained, who was perplexed, asking who sent them after all, because they dealt with Gudo, which means they were very strong. These were Ghost and Deadline, and the destruction of Ilhak's main trump card was their new task. They were about to leave, when suddenly they were pushed aside by Tae-hyun, who also came to the place to see everything with his own eyes. He turned to Hyungnim, saying that he had aged quite a bit since their last meeting, and now looked like an old man. It all started with Seung-min sitting in his office, counting his income for the last month, which turned out to be small. He said there were more in the last month, and Hyungnim, who provided him with the report, apologized. But the director said that he shouldn't have because it was his fault. But what was more important was how they felt. One of them had a broken arm, the other a broken leg, but neither of them particularly complained about their injuries. A man with a broken leg, on top of everything else, was suddenly seized by a cramp, and he grabbed his leg. Seung-min said that they all worked hard, and he, as a person who absolutely does not know how to fight, was glad that they survived. He was still talking when suddenly some strange sounds were heard, and one of the knives suggested going and checking the situation. When he asked the officers on duty what that sound was, they replied that it was like the roar of a motorcycle, even though they were on the 3rd floor. The sound came from the landing, where the guards looked in surprise at the unexpected guest. Of course, it was Deadline who raced towards them on his motorcycle, and in the blink of an eye the men were already on the ground. The others, who had arrived to see what the noise was, now also looked at the motorcyclist in horror. But he didn't waste his time and used his front wheel to knock down the doors to Ilhak's main office, where the knives' headquarters were located. They looked in amazement as the door's pieces scattered in all directions, unable to do anything. Deadline drove into the room at high speed, swinging his crowbar in all directions, and the soup was filled with fear. Because of this, they could not move, continuing to stand in place. And the next moment, one of them had his face cut with a crowbar. The poor fellow even threw back his head, blood sprayed out of his mouth, but he, like the others, did not think of retreating. The knives could not be taken by surprise. After all, they had gone through countless battles. Just like professional boxers who were always ready for anything, they had no doubts about their duty. Using their experience and skills, they bravely take on any enemy to protect their organization. However, in this case, a hitherto unprecedented enemy entered the ring, whose appearance they could not predict. He was like a knight on horseback, all in heavy armor, against their fists and pride. This discovery made the knives slightly confused, because they had never fought such an opponent before. And this allowed Deadline to discover their weak point, where he directed all his next attacks. A metal crowbar against a human bone is like a knight's sword against a boxer's fists. Even though they were professionals, they couldn't fight against something like that, especially since they had wounds from the last battle. And other members of the Gorang group came for Deadline, who also had to participate in the destruction of Gudo. Now it was no longer a fair fight because the enemy was superior in numbers and was armed. Then Knives saw the badge of the Gorang organization on the jacket of the men and told them to hold their horses. Hyungnim shouted that in this case it was a direct violation of their agreement, asking if they really wanted to turn the entire committee against them. But the men did not seem to understand what he was talking about. One of them was ordered to deal with this old fool. With the last of their strength, all the knives fought for their organization, forgetting about past traumas and wounds. Choi Guan-pal, the 7th knife, was furious, asking who these freaks dared bare their teeth at. However, his leg was sprained, and Hyungnim saw that it had not healed yet, which meant they wouldn't be able to fight for long. Guang-pal was a pretty strong knife, but in this state he couldn't fight to his full potential, so Hyungnim decided to take on the guy on the bike. It was the least he could do, and meanwhile Deadline had already raised his wheel, intending to run over the head of one of the knives. The man's name was Sunmon, and Hyungnim managed to pull him away at the last moment, avoiding a collision with the wheel. He told him to protect the master and he himself would detain these bandits, but Songming replied that he could not cope alone. Then a man named Jang Tok-bae, Ilhak's 8th knife, who was knocked out first by Deadline, suddenly stood up again, saying that he would help too. He said that together with Hyungnim, they would be able to teach this idiot on a motorcycle a lesson. This surprised Deadline a little, who clearly didn't expect him to get up after being hit in the head with a crowbar. He was distracted by him, and this gave Hyungnim the opportunity to attack him when he was unprotected. He told director Lee Seung-min not to worry about them and to save himself, because it was dangerous here, and they would not be able to hold them off for long. Guan-pal was fighting the rest of the Gorang members who had arrived as reinforcements, and so far he was doing a good job of stopping them. Sung-mon said that he was counting on him, leading the director out of the room who protested, saying that he did not want them to be killed here. But Guanpao told him not to worry, because he would catch up with them later after all. They were the 9 Knives of Ilhak. Sung Man went out with the director to the car and opened the doors, telling him to get in, but he was still leaning, saying that they should help the others. But Sun Man replied that Goreng had begun to act, so now they were in danger and it would be best to retreat. Director Lee protested again, saying that there was no retreat, but he interrupted him, saying that if he died, they would lose everything they fought for. Then Sheng Min asked if they really wanted him to live no matter what, and were even willing to sacrifice their lives for this. Even if everyone else died, their battle would not be in vain, because they knew what they were doing. This was the background to their fight, and now Tae-hyun stood in front of Hyungnim, saying that this was a rather sad end for the 9 Knives. He noticed that their boss was nowhere to be seen and questioned him about it, asking if he had abandoned them. Seung-min was indeed driving in the car. His organization was left behind, and with it its loyal members. He sat there in a depressed mood, asking what would be the point if only he, the director, survived. He was overcome with regret, because he did everything he could to make Ilhak rise from the ashes, but in the end, he only completely killed him. Sun Man wanted to say that the master was mistaken, but he interrupted him, telling him not to call him that. In desperation, he asked himself how long he would remain a young master and when he would become Ilhak's real boss. Seeing that he was not in a good mood, Sun Man said that this was not what he meant. He was about to continue and add a few words of encouragement when suddenly a motorcycle jumped out onto the road. It was Deadline who anticipated their retreat and even placed spikes on the road to prevent them from passing. Sun Man noticed them in time, but it was impossible to go around such an obstacle, so he was forced to turn the car around. Added to this were the weather conditions, because it was raining heavily outside, which only complicated movement. Fortunately, at the last moment they managed to stop the car. Seung-min opened the door, going out. He asked what it was, but at the same time Sun Man got out of the car and said that he would go on without him. Closing the door, he said that the director still had a lot to do, but he believed in him and that he could handle it. He approached him and covered him with his hand from the rain, saying that they all believed in him, because he had already shown that he was worthy of being called their boss. Lee Sun-man looked at him like a father looking at a child who was about to leave him as he began his adult life. He took his face in his hand, saying that there was something else that he should not forget and always remember. Seung-min knew where to run. His suit was completely wet due to the rain, but he didn't care at all. The last words that Sung-man said to him back then were a reminder that he was their boss, and they, the Knives of Ilhak, would always be his support. He was unable to run any further and fell to his knees in the middle of the sidewalk, while the rain continued to spit on his unprotected back. Passers-by walked and looked at him, but he didn't even pay attention, because it wasn't about his own image that he should now unite. He thought that it didn't matter how pitiful the organization's situation might seem. He is the CEO of Ilhak, and all responsibility for her well-being lies with him. Then Sun-man told him that there was nothing that the Knives couldn't do for him, so he thought he should pay them back in kind.